Hey now. Welcome everybody. We should be live. Let's go ahead and get all my ducks in a row and make sure that everything's the way it should be. Of course, it takes YouTube a moment to really sort of kick in that I'm live here. There we are. Alright, well now I have the URL. And I'm going to put the YouTube chat actually over here. I think that's a good spot for it. I wish I could just sort of pin these, you know. That would be ideal. I don't know if there's a way to do that. I wish there was a way to make a browser window always on top. But I don't think that's possible. As far as I know, it's not. Actually, let me just look into that real quick, see if it's something that I can do. Apparently there's an add-on that does that. Okay. There we have it. Okay, well, we're live. I'm going to just try and have the two chats side by side here, and hopefully that'll work. I don't think I need to do a whole lot there. Let's go ahead and get the word out that we're live. Let's see. Okay, I already texted Laurel, so we should be good on that. Let me just do all my my Discord posts throughout the various places that we let people know that I'm live. Okay, fantastic. That can go over there. All right, so I think if we just have it like that, let's see. All right, we're good. We're good. And I already texted Laurel, so that should be good. We're going to be reading the Two Towers today, so I'm not really digging this like this though. Well, let's hope that this works out the way that it is. So the last time we only got through 2 chapters, right? Yeah, we did the Departure of Boromir and we did the Riders of Rohan. And yeah, that's not even a lot, but we got through that. I mean, you know, that's the thing about the Lord of the Rings, because it's so much denser of a text than The Hobbit was. So, you know, there's almost every paragraph you can stop and talk about a lot of different things there, and it's going to be like even crazier when we get to the Silmarillion, which is only like a little, you know, over 300 pages, but boy, you know, like you almost have to stop at every line and explain things, you know. So that'll be an odyssey, you know. That'll be an odyssey. Of course, that's a ways off. We basically just started the Two Towers. I don't know. How many streams did it take to get through The Hobbit? I'm pretty sure for the Fellowship of the Ring, it was like 10. And then for, yeah. Let's see. There's an easy way. I'll just go to my playlists here. Let's see. Playlists. Here we are. So, that's the Two Towers. Fellowship of the Ring was 10. The Hobbit was only 4. You know, so that's going to be really interesting. We'll see how long it takes us to get through the Two Towers. The Two Towers is somewhat shorter than... Well, The Fellowship of the Ring is just a huge book. The Two Towers is shorter, and even actually The Return of the King is shorter, which you may look at the book and you go, oh, wait, that's just patently false. How could you say that The Return of the King is shorter? Well, because the appendix is so big. Hey, Moogle, how are you doing today? Oh, I can't see the YouTube chat. Hold on, where's my YouTube chat? There it is. Hey, Chewy, how's it going? Yeah, so I'm just curious. It'll be interesting. I don't think any of them are going to be 10 streams. Maybe The Return of the King with the appendixes. Because the appendices are almost like Silmarillion content in some way, and there's just a lot to talk about. The thing is, some of them are like charts and things like that, you know. But I plan to probably go through that very, very slowly. Now, I am ordering for myself... Hey, Anons, how's it going? I'm going to order for myself a little bookshelf that I can keep on my desktop here, so that I can just easily pull whatever book I need instead of having all these piles around me, you know? So that's something that I'm going to be ordering, maybe just tonight. Maybe after stream I'll just go on Amazon and just order that, you know? I'm going to have to put it together, but that could be a fun little project, right? I do have a bit of a channel announcement to talk about, and I'm probably also going to make a community post about this, and I'll probably mention it in my next Q&A video. Not the one that's going to come out next week, because that's already been filmed, and it's actually already up for members. Like Chewy, for example, may have already seen it. But in the next episode after, the next one that I film, in that I'm going to expand... I've always said in the beginning of those videos that if you want to ask a question, you can do so in the comments, and I'll answer it in the comments. But if you want to be featured in in the video, if you want, you know, your question to be part of the video, I have people go through Quora. And that's because I started the YouTube channel as an extension of the Quora. But I think that here's the thing. Even though I still have more followers on Quora than I do on YouTube, and even though I have more views on Quora than I do on YouTube, there is no mistaking that revenue is better on YouTube than it is on Quora. So, yeah, we're going to have to go through the appendixes and really just go very slow. So what I wanted to... I noticed this when I was looking through stuff earlier today on YouTube, and I noticed that there is now a feature, and I didn't have it enabled because I didn't know about it, but I have now enabled it. And the feature is about community posts. Now, community posts, which are basically the posts that I make on the community tab, which is usually me saying, hey, this is the stream schedule, or hey, reminder, I'm going to be live tonight, or hey, I can't do a video because of this, this, and this, although that hasn't happened in quite a while. But it doesn't really feel like a community thing because it's really just me posting. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like a little blog. But now I have enabled it where users can post there. So I'm going to open it to that as another way that people will be able to submit questions that they want to be featured in a video. Because I've had a few people who just, for whatever reason, they're not able to figure out Quora. And, you know, maybe, you know, to me, Quora seems very, very easy, but that's probably because I've been on it for so long and I'm sort of too close to the situation to really see if it might prove difficult for people who are used to, you know, mediums like YouTube. And I've had a lot of people come over from Quora to YouTube, and I've had people come from YouTube to Quora, so that's really great. I'm not stopping Quora by any means. That is still probably going to be the primary source of questions. But I'm going to say that if you post a question as a post on my community tab, then we'll include those in videos. That's really all to say about that. That's just something that I saw today. I'm not sure exactly how it works, though. I don't know exactly how one goes there and makes a post. I'm not sure if that's a popular feature. I'm going to have to test it out myself and maybe do like a little recording of me on a different account making a post there and then show that on a video so that people can see what I'm talking about. But I just noticed it when I went to to make a post reminding people that we're going to be live, and I saw that there was a such thing as, let's see, hold on, can I find it? In content, let's see, posts, yeah, is that it? See, now I don't see that. I saw some, how do I find that? It was like user posts or something, and it said I didn't have it enabled, and then I went and enabled it, and I don't know how to find it now. Hey, Laurel, how's it going? Let's see, because I see videos, shorts, live, posts, playlists, podcasts, and promotions. A lot of them start with P. There's a lot of alliteration going on here. But I'm not seeing... Maybe it's under the community tab, actually. Here it is, community tab. So in my community tab, I have comments, mentions, and those are usually the two tabs. But there's a third tab now, and it says viewer posts. And nobody's posted there, but... Let's see. I'm gonna just sort of like look into it a little bit to see, for the people who don't find Quora to be something that they really want to use, but they still want to submit questions that will be featured in a video. The community post thing, that might be a way. We're gonna try it, right? We're gonna try it. And we'll see if people are willing to use it. I don't know if it's something that YouTubers generally use. It is something that really just recently popped up, But yeah. You got the number wrong, Moogle. It's LM5. That really proves that you're actually typing out each person's name instead of using, like, the first few letters and then hitting tab, I always wondered about that. But yeah. I'm like, wait a minute. Laurel's Lore Master 5. There you go. Laurel is Lore Master 5 of 9. Well, really 8. We have an open spot. We've tried to fill it a few times. Laurel, actually, do you happen to know anybody who you think would be good for that spot that's open? Because originally the whole idea of the 9 Lore Masters of Quora, which is an idea that Matt came up with, and it was going to be, you like the background? That's, yeah, Bag End. Hi, Matt. How's it going? Oh, and thank you for sending me that website. What was I saying? I've lost it. Let me take a drink of water. I'm just all over the map right now. I forget what I was saying. Oh, right. It was me and Matt and Jeff. But Jeff hasn't really yes, they said it really helped. Jeff hasn't really been active at all. And I said we should make Sid the third one, and so it's been me and Matt and Sid, and I said though, but now, like, we really just have an open spot. Deb, well, see, here's the thing. For the Lore Masters, Chewy, we're looking for... Like, Deborah is great. I've enjoyed her questions. I've enjoyed answering her questions. But we're looking for people who are experts, who answer the questions and are able to write really well about Tolkien's worlds. Not people to ask questions, And I was just wondering if Laurel, or really if anybody just knew anybody that's active on Quora in the Tolkien spaces that might be that ninth Lore Master. The one that I was looking at personally was Louis Perez. I think he's great. I thought Louis would make an absolutely fantastic addition to our group, but when we reached out to him, he just simply said that he was too busy and that he was, flattered to be asked, but was not interested in at this time, So, yeah. There's only, oh my, Gunny's going insane. There's only so many Tolkien writers out there. As a matter of fact, I was just talking to people that work at Quora and saying that my digests are a mess. I said, look, I'm really not happy with the state of my digests and the state of the recommended spaces and the things that are being promoted to me, because I'm getting a lot of politics and I'm not getting a lot of literature. And I'm here to write about Tolkien and to read about Tolkien, and I'm interested also in other forms of, if people want to write about Shakespeare or whatever, I'm interested in that as well, and that's what should be shown to me, not politics. And they said a whole bunch of different things about my account and stuff, and it should be improving, but one of the things that one of the Quora employees said to me, which I thought was really amusing, was it's difficult to recommend Tolkien content to you because you've seen it all. I'm like, okay, but yeah, I guess we just need more new blood on Quora, right? We need more people to come in and do what I'm doing and what Matt's doing and what Sid's doing and what Laurel is doing and Dutch and Mark and all the people that are in our group, But yeah, I was trying to, I mean, because Matt was in my ear about replacing Jeff, and you'll do it. You're not an expert or a writer. Well, then what would you do? You'd basically be, what's up, David? You'd be doing what Jeff is doing, which is really not, I mean, he runs a Tolkien space, but he doesn't write a lot. He knows a lot about Tolkien. He's got a fantastic mind, but I just don't think he's yet interested in writing. He's more interested in managing his space, which is perfectly fine. He can do that. That's his prerogative. But it's not like super important. I told Matt, I said, the 9 is just a name. It doesn't actually have to be 9 of us, even though it started with 9 of us. Nancy Hayes or Laura Frey. Okay, so I like that you're suggesting women, because I had said that when Matt and me and Matt were coming up with all the names. Let me write this down here. That I in my exact words, I said I don't want it to be a sausage festival. I don't want it to be just 9 dudes. I said we have to have other perspectives. And that's where, it wasn't just you, Laurel. There were a few other names that were kicked about. There was one, I forget her name, Ashley something or other. She's not active anymore, unfortunately, so we couldn't get a hold of her. But yeah, I mean, I'll look into them, and if I think they're good, I'll also send them to Sid and Matt, and because that's the way we do it. Like when I said, maybe we should add Louis for the 9th, Louis Perez. And I sent it to Matt and Sid, and they both gave their thumbs up. But then, unfortunately, he said no, which is perfectly fine. He doesn't have to join us. And there are not a lot of and this is really to the detriment of the community, that there aren't a lot of women that are writing about Tolkien, which is a shame. I wish there were more. I mean, there's Laurel is the best, and then there's like Hannah. There's something wrong with her, so, and then there's a few that just aren't active anymore. And I think part of it, and I think Laurel could say, yes, you're right about this, is that it's a type of community that has been so very male for so very long, that sometimes when women enter into the community and they start writing, they're not taken as seriously, or they're criticized too harshly, and I've seen it happen, a dozen times, and it's terrible, especially when you have somebody like Laurel who's really great at writing about Tolkien. Okay, wait, I got to read what Chewy. I need to make. Hold on one second. I don't need to read that, but I need to make the text bigger on YouTube. It's not as big as my. There we go. You matched with a lady on a dating site. Her profile said she was a Tolkien fan. Your first date, you asked her what she thought about Tommy B. She said she thought TB was some sort of will-o'-the-wisp. Oh, interesting. So she's thinking that Tom Bombadil is a spirit of light, which is interesting or fire, I guess. Will-o-wisps are sort of both. Because Tolkien did have the idea that there would be these things called sprites and wisps and mermaids, which were, light, fire, and or light, wind, and water, or spirits. They were once sort of the third tier of Ainur, but he sort of abandoned that idea. It's an interesting sort of thought. I don't think it's true because, well, I mean, a will-o'-the-wisp is usually sort of a nefarious thing, isn't it? It's sort of like I think we see examples of will-o'-the-wisp type. Hey, and there's Deborah. Hey, Deborah, how's it going? The sort of type of will-o'-the-wisp archetype, we see it in like the Dead Marshes, for example, or the Mulips in the marshes in the north, which may be sort of the same sort of idea. So I don't think that Tom Bombadil is that sort of thing. But I think it's really cool, Chewy, that you matched with somebody on a dating site and they said they were a Tolkien fan and you asked about Bombadil and they gave you an answer, because like it would have been terrible if the, or not terrible, but it would have been sort of unfortunate if you asked that question and the answer was, well, I don't know, who was he? I don't remember him from the movies, that would have been. That would have been sort of awful, right? But yeah, I would like to see if we could. Nancy did their thesis on Tolkien. Okay, I'm good. Yeah, I'm gonna look in both of those names. I have a note for myself to look into them. I'll vet them and I'll show them to Matt and Sid, and that because that's sort of like the ruling council there, me and Matt and Sid, and I would love to have the ninth member be another woman because, like I said, I don't feel like we have enough women in the Tolkien community, and I would like to have more women in the Tolkien community. But it's just unfortunate that so many of them get shouted down. But we're looking to improve this sort of thing, I have found, though, that many, and me and Matt are both in agreement about this, is that most of our favorite Tolkien artists are actually women. I know that Matt is very fond of Elena Kukanova, and I'm very fond of Jenny Dolphin. Jenny Dolphin is absolutely 100% my favorite Tolkien artist. I love the way that she draws the characters, especially the First Age characters, Yeah, we don't want you all alone there, Laurel. We'll figure it out. Hopefully, I mean, like I said, at this point, anybody that's really good and has the good personality, because there are people on Quora that have absolutely great minds, right? I'm not going to name names in this case, but there are people who have absolutely great minds and they really are great writers. And then you talk to them and it's like you're talking to like one of the trolls from The Hobbit, and it's like, oh man, why are you so rude and mean like that? What is the point of that? So it seems that we see that sometimes. There was a time when the ninth one was going to be I'm not going to name a name here either, but there was going to be a guy, and we were talking to him, and right before we started actually writing stuff, he got into a big dust up with Matt, and I'm not I didn't get like all the details about it, but Matt was very, surprised and upset about the fact that like this guy that he thought was great and enjoyed his writing and everything, suddenly turned on him and was being, just extremely rude and unnecessarily cruel. And I thought that was odd, And then I found out recently that person doesn't really do a whole lot of writing anyway, that a lot of the articles that they write are actually AI, which is really a shame, to do something like that, because, if you've ever asked an AI about Tolkien, it's always really either very surface level knowledge that anybody could just look up, and, yep, hello there, Santa Cruz, how's it going? Today is the day when we read and discuss, or it just makes things up and it is completely wrong. And what was interesting here is that this had to do, Laurel here said to me, sent me a question. Do you remember what the question was about, Laurel? You asked a question, and you fed it to me, and you got some rather rude replies. People just saying, "Just read the book," or people saying, "Hey, if you're such an expert, then how come you're asking a question?" Which is really silly. And I remember looking at those answers and commenting on them and saying, "Hey, this is not really a productive use of your time here to be saying things like that." I don't remember what the question actually was, though, so I hope Laurel remembers. But what was interesting, though, is that it was about Anduril. Okay, it was about Anduril, which is, of course, Aragorn's sword. Narsil reforged into Anduril. I remember now. Okay, thank you. And what happened was, the way that Quora works is that it sort of says, okay, this is low quality, so we're going to collapse it. And what that means is that when you see a question and you click on it and you see all the different answers, and then it'll say, oh, there's 6 that are collapsed. And then if you click on that, you can see what the collapsed ones were. And some of the really like 1-sentence or 3-word answers were in that grouping of collapsed answers, but some were not, which is part of what my issue with it was. And one of the ones that was collapsed was a very detailed and very correct answer from a certain person. I'm not putting people's names out there right now. And I brought it up with the people that I know at Quora, and I said, well, how come it's not collapsing somebody who's writing just a single sentence and they're being rude, but something with multiple paragraphs and at least it looks like some thought was put into it is collapsed. And I asked it, on a weekend, and they're, the people that I talk to are not around on the weekend. So I had a little time to actually go back and read that answer, and I thought, actually, this seems a little suspicious, And I said, hey, is that AI? And they when they came back on Monday, they said, yeah, that's AI. I was like, oh. So then, of course, I immediately called Matt, and I said, hey, Matt, remember, so-and-so who was going to write with us and work on the book with us and be a part of something really cool and delving into the mysteries of Middle-earth. And then they suddenly decided to attack you and just basically say that they hate what we're doing and everything and just leave right before we started writing. And Matt's like, yeah, of course I remember that. How could I forget that as such a thing? And I said, well, guess what I found out? And Matt's guesses were interesting because Matt guessed nefarious things, but not the truth. Like he guessed, like, oh, is he trying to rip off our idea or just do it on his own? I said, no, it's not that. I said he's using AI to write his articles. I said, oh no. And he laughed so hard, and he had to have felt very vindicated by the thing, because to be attacked by somebody, is not something that I think Matt's super used to. I don't think he's used to that. I think I'm used to it. I know Sid is used to it, and Sid is sort of endlessly patient with people, as long as he thinks that he can, maybe bring them around, and he's pretty good at bringing people around, actually. But anyway, everybody, welcome to the stream. We are going to be reading The Two Towers today, so let's go. Let's actually get this started. We're going to come over here. So I have moved from, look at that, in just a click of a button, I have gone from being in Bag End, about to leave on my journey, and here I am in Rivendell already. I don't know how I got here so fast. So we have right here The Two Towers, being the second part of The Lord of the Rings, and the last time we read The Departure of Boromir, and we read The Riders of Rohan. So what we know is we have the Fellowship is completely scattered. Of course, they believe that Gandalf has died. Merry and Pippin have been captured by orcs and carried off. Boromir has died. Frodo and Sam have gone alone together into Mordor. Alone together, sort of a lovely little oxymoron there. And then, of course, Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas are on their way to track down Merry and Pippin. They have met with Éomer and several Rohirrim. And then The most recent thing that has happened is a mysterious old man appeared by their camp and scared away all their horses. And of course, that was almost certainly Saruman. How long have I been collaborating with Matt and Sid? What is it, about 2.5 years now, I guess? It was not that long after I first sort of like came onto Quora and established myself that Matt started contacting me, and it was weird because I'm like, who is this guy, who calls himself Lore Master, and leaves me lots of comments and is telling me to call him on the phone, and one day I finally called him, and he had a lot to say, and he's just a great fellow. And what's interesting is Sid actually had left Quora because it ceased to be interesting to him, but he found what me and Matt were doing very interesting, and that drew him back. Let's see, what did you say, Anons? I watched a video the other day. They made a joke that Tolkien doesn't have gray characters in his universe, like Snape in Harry Potter. Would you consider Denethor a gray character, or some other example? So Tolkien absolutely does have characters who are what you're referring to as morally gray. And what morally gray usually refers to is a character that is inherently good, but is willing to do things that are not so great to attain the meaning, their what they think is good. They'll resort to sort of underhanded things, and usually Tolkien doesn't like to promote that sort of thing, because a common theme that you see, and we see it especially with Saruman and the discussion that that he had with Gandalf, is that you can't do terrible things and then achieve a great goal. It doesn't work like that. You can't do something foul and have the result be fair. However, we have seen characters like Turin Turambar, who is the main character of my favorite Tolkien story, The Children of Húrin, he goes through a very sort of similar arc as Beowulf from, of course, classic myth, Anglo-Saxon myth, where he does things that are very morally questionable, and it is not because he believes those things to be right. It is because he is deeply troubled and he had a really terrible life. So we see that. Yeah, hey, Time Lord boy. I'm like Tommy B. I've never heard him referred to as Tommy B before. A wizard did it there. I believe that the morally gray character is Turin. And unfortunately, while Tolkien abandoned the idea of actually doing the sort of Ragnarok or Revelation style ending to the Legendarium, where there would be a big final battle, something that he referred to as the Digor Digorath, which is the Battle of Battles, where Turin would be redeemed. That the spirit of Turin would return to the world, and he would be the one to kill Morgoth once and for all, and that he would actually become one of the Valar, which, of course, it's an idea that evolved over time and then eventually was abandoned. So Turin is an example of what we may call an anti-hero or a tragic hero, or a morally gray character. Denethor is not a morally gray character. Denethor is absolutely a good character. He just has flaws. He has flaws that are exacerbated by the terrible things that happened in his life, such as his wife dying very early in life, and then his own premature aging, and the death of his son, and then, of course, the seemingly never-ending war that he was thrown into. But I don't think that he ever really did anything terrible until he tried to kill Faramir. But at that point, he had gone completely insane. But Tolkien does have morally gray characters. Another example of it is Mim the Petty Dwarf. Because I don't think that, Mim is often seen as this awful character who does absolutely awful things. And then when you look at it, he's only ever really just retaliating for terrible things that were done to him. And it's sort of a lesson on, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, which is, I think, that a belief that Tolkien had, But yeah, no, and I don't think that. Here's the thing: there's sort of this thought that if you have clearly defined heroes and villains, then that's simplistic, and that's it's too clean cut, and it's not complex. And I mean, nobody can read the Lord of the Rings and say that it's not complex. But if you delve into the Silmarillion, then you see bad guys doing good things. You see good guys doing bad things. You see people who come very close to falling into evil and then being brought back, or people who make a decisive choice to become evil and then make a decisive choice to come back. You have fallen angels. You have all sorts of different things. So Tolkien absolutely did have it. Gray characters and that sort of thing. He just didn't have gray morality. He didn't believe that those characters were doing the right thing, and their lives were tragic a lot of times because of the things that they did, or because of the things that were done to them and the poor way that they reacted to it. Gollum is a morally great character? No, Gollum is a horrible, horrible person. There's almost no good in him. And that's really sad. Gollum is a sad character. Even before he got the ring, he was a bully and a criminal and a ne'er-do-well and just sort of a nasty guy, you know? And then the ring just made him more of himself. And I think what you're experiencing, Time Lord, is you're just feeling empathy for him because of the terrible things that he went through at the hands of a much greater evil. And that's okay. It's perfectly good to say, wow, he really didn't deserve all that. Because that was the point. That's the point. No matter how horrible you are, you don't deserve to have those sorts of things done to you. The things that Sauron, for example, did to Gollum, and the way that he was treated, the way that he was tortured and everything. And perhaps early on in life, if he had been shown more compassion, he would have become a better person. But anyway, let's get to the Two Towers, guys. And of course, I will be pausing. And hey, I see Bonnie Bell. How are you doing? Bonnie Bell Plumbottom. I've said it so many times. I love the name. I love how hobbitish it is, Because you have to let me answer this question. Why did Gandalf believe that there was a small chance that Gollum could be redeemed? And this is really, really going into the spiritual aspect of Tolkien's work and the Legendarium, is that anybody, except for Morgoth, who was literally the devil, anybody could be redeemed, but they have to want to be redeemed. So, for example, Tolkien was once asked about the orcs, and he said, he was asked, is it possible that the orcs could be redeemed? And he said, I don't see how it can happen, but I have faith that it may. And that's really, Tolkien's whole thought about it. All of the elves, the Noldor, that committed the first kinslaying, were told that they would be forgiven if they repented. And some of them did. Finarfin was an example, and he was forgiven. The ones that went to Middle-earth, even they were eventually forgiven. Yep, exactly. Deborah's absolutely correct. His redemption would be difficult, but when Tolkien was asked specifically about Gollum, because when he dies, he's going to face his creator. He's going to meet Iluvatar, and he's going to, there's going to be a reckoning of his deeds. And of course, the destruction of the ring is going to be weighed against a lot of what he did. And Tolkien was asked, do you think that Gollum would be forgiven? And he said, that's not for me to say. That's between him and his creator. You would love to see a fanfic about I think you meant repentant, and you made a slight typo. I would love to see that too, and maybe we could ask Sid to write something like that. But anyway, we're going to start here with the third chapter of the Two Towers, which is called the Uruk-hai. Now, the way that the Two Towers is structured is that there are a lot of things that are happening at the same time. As a matter of fact, the first half of this book and the second half of this book are happening pretty much simultaneously. But even within the first half, there are parts that are happening simultaneously. We had 2 chapters that pretty much followed Aragorn, along with Gimli and Legolas, and now we're going a little bit back to Merry and Pippin to find out what happened with them. Did he destroy the ring out of his own greed? See, that's interesting, because he also really hated Sauron. And Tolkien even once entertained the thought of Gollum destroying the ring, not because it was an accident and he wanted it, but the idea that he did it so that Sauron could never recover it, because he knew that that would be a really terrible thing. All right, here we go. Chapter 3, the Uruk-hai. Pippin lay in a dark and troubled dream. It seemed that he could hear his own small voice echoing in black tunnels, calling Frodo, Frodo. But instead of Frodo, hundreds of hideous orc faces grinned at him out of the shadows. Hundreds of hideous arms grasped at him from every side. Where was Merry? He woke. Cold air blew in his face. He was lying on his back. Evening was coming, and the sky above was growing dim. He turned and found that the dream was little worse than the waking. His wrists, legs, and ankles were tied with cords. Beside him Merry lay, white-faced, with a dirty rag bound across his brows. All about them sat or stood a great company of orcs. Slowly, in Pippin's aching head, memory pieced itself together and became separated from dream shadows. Of course, he and Merry had run off into the woods. What had come over them? Why had they dashed off like that, taking no notice of old Strider? They had run a long way, shouting. He could not remember how far or how long. And then suddenly they had crashed right into a group of orcs. They were standing, listening, and they did not appear to see Merry and Pippin until they were almost in their arms. Then they yelled, and dozens of other goblins had sprung out of the trees. Merry and he had drawn their swords, but the orcs did not wish to fight, and had tried only to lay hold of them, even when Merry had cut off several of their arms and hands. Good old Merry. Let's pause here for just a brief moment. And hello there to Zeldaman and to Vosh. How is it going? There is a little bit of truth to what you said, Vosh, about Gollum seeing Sauron as a competitor for the ring, but also he knows that he's the true master of the ring. And he knows how terrible he was, and he was personally tortured by Sauron, so there is that element to it as well. But what you're saying is at least partially true. Okay, so now this is interesting. I just want to point out that even to this day, I still sometimes occasionally will get people who will tell me that goblins and orcs are distinct from each other. And I've been saying it just over and over and over again, that the only distinction between goblin and orc is a linguistic one. And even as early as The Hobbit generally uses the term goblin. And watch the language a little bit there, Zelda man, if you could just tone it down a little here on a Tolkien stream. Thank you. The only difference is linguistic, and The Hobbit points out that orc is a term for goblin. And people still don't believe me. And here we have it as clear as day. They ran into a company of orcs. And then the word goblin is using... Now, goblin is not commonly used in The Lord of the Rings, but we have an example here. Then they yelled, and dozens of other goblins had sprung out of the trees. So, well, like I said, it's a very, very just linguistic thing. Goblins are orcs, orcs are goblins. And some people will say, well, the goblins are the smaller ones and the orcs are the bigger ones. And no, that's not true. As a matter of fact, goblin and hobgoblin are the smaller and larger ones. Hob is an old English word. It means elf. So basically, a hobgoblin is a goblin that is the size of an elf or a man, since elves and men are the same size. So we see it here also, and this is the biggest thing that I point out. I said, well, what was the name of Thorin's sword? Orcrist. Orc wrist. What does Elrond say that translates to? Goblin cleaver. It doesn't get any more. It doesn't get any more clear than that to me. But still, Still, we get people who insist that they're the same thing. Or that they're not the same thing, I should say. Which I think is crazy. Let's move on. Then Boromir had come leaping through the trees. He had made them fight. He slew many of them, and the rest fled. But they had not gone far on the way back when they were attacked again by 100 orcs at least, some of them very large. And they shot a rain of arrows, always at Boromir. Boromir had blown his great horn till the woods rang, and at first the orcs had been dismayed and had drawn back. When no answer but the echoes came, they had attacked more fiercely than ever. Pippin did not remember much more. His last memory was of Boromir laying against a tree, plucking out an arrow. Then darkness fell suddenly. "I supposed I was knocked on the head," he said to himself. "I wonder if poor Merry is much hurt. What has happened to Boromir? Why didn't the orcs kill us? Where are we, and where are we going?" So, here's another sort of interesting thing here. They had already... Fohammer was Glamdring. Yeah, that was the other one. That was Glamdring. He's wondering, why didn't they just kill me? And he noticed even that when the orcs are shooting the arrows, that they were always shooting at Boromir. And that when Merry and Pippin attacked the orcs, they didn't want to fight. Even though Merry is doing very well for himself, he's cutting off arms, he's cutting off hands, he's doing very well, and still they don't want to fight until Boromir is there. And we learn, of course, that they're under orders. Now there are several distinct groups of orcs here, and which we already learned about from Aragorn when he went through all the bodies. But basically, they fall into two groups, which are the Uruk-hai. The Uruk-hai are the specific type of hybrids of goblins and men that Saruman has made. They are the very, very large ones. And then we have the Black Uruks, which are these type of orcs that come from Mordor and they don't work for Saruman, they work for Sauron. And both Sauron and Saruman have all of their minions under the order that if they see any of these hobbits, they're to capture them, not to kill them. And this is really interesting, and you might wonder, what does it matter? They don't want the orcs to know about the ring or anything like that, because if an orc gets a hold of the ring, is he really going to bring it to Sauron? Is he really going to bring it to Saruman? Or is he going to say, hey, this thing's pretty great, I'm going to keep it for myself? Of course, that's what happens. So as far as the orcs know, they're only after hobbits, not necessarily rings. Now, we learn later that there's one specific orc that knows a little bit more, and that's going to play into the story, but let's continue here. He could not answer the questions. He felt cold and sick. I wish Gandalf had never persuaded Elrond to let us come, he thought. What good have I been? Just a nuisance, a passenger, a piece of luggage. And now I have been stolen, and I am just a piece of luggage for the orcs. I hope Strider or someone will come and claim us. But ought I to hope for it? Won't that throw out all the plans? I wish I could get free. He struggled a little, quite uselessly. One of the orcs sitting near laughed and said something to a companion in their abominable language. Rest while you can, little fool, he said then to Pippin in the common speech, which he made almost as hideous as his own language. Rest while you can. We'll find a use for your legs before long. You'll wish you had got none. You wish you had got none before we get home. If I had my way, you'd wish you were dead now, said the other. I'd make you squeak, you miserable rat. He stooped over Pippin, bringing his yellow fangs close to his face. He had a black knife with a long, jagged blade in his hand. Lie quiet or I'll tickle you with this, he hissed. Don't draw attention to yourself, or I may forget my orders. Curse the Isengard. He passed into a long, angry speech in his own tongue that slowly died away into muttering and snarling. Terrified, Pippin lay still, though the pain at his wrists and ankles was growing, and the stones beneath him were boring into his back. To take his mind off himself, he listened intently to all that he could hear. There were many voices round about, and though orc speech sounded at times full of hate and anger, it seemed plain that something like a quarrel had begun, and was getting hotter. To Pippin's surprise, he found that much of the talk was intelligible. Many of the orcs were using ordinary language. Apparently the members of 2 or 3 quite different tribes were present, and they could not understand one another's orc speech. There was an angry debate concerning what they were to do now, which way they were to take, and what should be done with the prisoners. Now let me pause just very briefly here, and let's talk about orc speech. Now we got a little bit here. And this comes after, curse the Isengarders, and that's pretty much what he's doing. He's laying a curse on Saruman. He's speaking of him in detestable terms. The Rosetta Stone for orc, yes. So Sauron had created a language called the Black Speech of Mordor, and a lot of people assume this is what orcs speak. They speak the Black Speech. And we got the example of the Black Speech being what was written on the One Ring, Ash, Naz, Grimbatul, all that stuff, right? But what's interesting is that the idea of the Black Speech was to sort of be a common speech for the orcs, because they all have their own dialects, they all have their own orcish tongues, and they don't always understand each other all that well. So he thought, well, I'll create a language that all orcs can speak, and it'll sort of bring them all together. And of course it was a massive failure, because here they are speaking the common speech, they're speaking Westron. Makes you wonder why Sauron bothered. Why did he create a language that nobody was going to speak? And it just sort of shows one of the many failures of the evil characters and how they're, they waste their energy on things like that. All right, let's continue here. To Pippin's surprise, he found that much... Oh, I already read that part. I'm sorry. Let's skip ahead here. There's no time to kill them properly, said one. No time for play on this trip. That can't be helped, said another. But why not kill them quick? Kill them now. They're a cursed nuisance, and we're in a hurry. Evening's coming on, and we ought to get a move on. Orders, said a third voice in a deep growl. Kill all but not the halflings. They ought to be brought back alive and as quickly as possible. That's my orders. What are they wanted for? Asked several voices. Why alive? Do they give good sport? No. I heard that one of them has got something that's wanted for the war, some elvish plot or another. Anyway, they'll each be questioned. Is that all you know? Why don't we search them and find out? We might find something that we could use ourselves. That is a very interesting remark, sneered a voice, softer than the others, but more evil. I may have to report that. The prisoners are not to be searched or plundered. Those are my orders. And mine too, said the deep voice. Alive and as captured, no spoiling. That's my orders. Not our orders, said one of the earlier voices. We have come all the way from the mines to kill and avenge our folk. I wish to kill and then go back. Then you can wish again, said the growling voice. I am Ugluk. I command. I return to Isengard by the shortest road. Is Saruman the master of the Great Eye? Said the evil voice. We should go back at once to Lugburs. So Lugburs, let's talk about that. Lugburs is an orcish saying that basically means prison. Black prison, to be exact. Burs is darkness or blackness. Lug is prison. And that is what they refer to the Dark Tower as. Barad-dûr is what the elves would call it. So they're basically saying, we have these sort of 3 elements. We have one that are like, hey, we're from Moria. We're just out here for revenge. We just came here to kill. We're not interested in any of this stuff. Then you have this other group, the Uruk-hai, saying, hey, we got to take them to Saruman. And then you have this other group saying, we got to take them to Sauron. So this is the only way, really, that Merry and Pippin could possibly survive such a terrible thing to happen to them as being captured by orcs, is that the orcs aren't getting along with each other. And there's sort of a reflection here to The Hobbit where, Bilbo and the dwarves, well, really just the dwarves are captured by the trolls, and Bilbo is, in hiding. Well, he is grabbed. He is captured. It's just that they let him go after a bit. But he gets them to argue with each other and quarrel, and that's how they survive. And this goes into one of the deepest themes that we see in Tolkien's explorations of the nature of evil, evil is never cooperative. They don't work together towards a common goal. They're all working towards their own goals. Even if they're following orders, orcs are not loyal. The exception may be the Uruk-hai, specifically to Saruman, because they see him as a bit of a father figure. He treats them better than anybody else has ever treated them. But generally speaking, when we see two of the evil creatures or the evil beings working together, whether it's Sauron and Saruman or Sauron and Morgoth, there's always a master and a follower. It's never on equal footing, and they always are ready to stab each other in the back. Okay, let's continue here. "If we could cross the great river, we might," said another voice. "But there are not enough of us to venture down to the bridges." "I came across," said the evil voice. "A winged Nazgul awaits us northward on the east bank. Maybe, then you'll fly off with our prisoners and get all the pay and praise in Lugburs and leave us to foot it as best we can through this horse country. No, we must stick together. These lands are dangerous, full of foul rebels and brigands." "Aye, we must stick together," growled Ugluk. "I don't trust you, little swine. You've got no guts outside your own sights. Outside your own sties. But for us, you'd all have run away. We are the fighting Uruk-hai. We slew the great warrior. We took the prisoners. We are the servants of Saruman the Wise, the White Hand, the hand that gives us man's flesh to eat. We came out of Isengard and led you here, and we shall lead you back by the way we choose. I am Ugluk. I have spoken." "You have spoken more than enough, Ugluk," sneered the evil voice. "I wonder how they would like it in Lugburs. They might think that Ugluk's shoulders needed relieving of a swollen head. They might ask where his strange ideas came from. Did they come from Saruman, perhaps? Who does he think he is, setting up on his own with his filthy white badges? They might agree with me, with Grishnak, the trusted messenger. And I, Grishnak, say this: Saruman is a fool, and a dirty, treacherous fool, but the great eye is on him." "Swine, is it? How do you folk like being called swine by the muckrakers of a dirty little wizard? It's orc flesh they'll eat, I warrant." Many loud yells and orc speech answered him, and the ringing clash of weapons being drawn. Cautiously Pippin rolled over, hoping to see what would happen. His guard had gone to join the fray. In the twilight he saw a large black orc, probably Ugluk, standing facing Grishnak, a short, crooked-legged creature, very broad and with long arms that hung almost to the ground. Round them were many smaller goblins. Pippin supposed that they were the ones from the north. They had drawn their knives and swords, but hesitated to attack Ugluk. Ugluk shouted, and a number of other orcs of nearly his own size ran up. Then suddenly, without warning, Ugluk sprang forwards and with 2 swift strokes swept the heads off of 2 of his opponents. Grishnak stepped aside and vanished into the shadows. The others gave way, and one stepped backwards and fell over Merry's prostrate form with a curse. Yet that probably saved his life, for Ugluk's followers leaped over him and cut down another with their broad-bladed swords. It was the Yellow-Fang guard. His body fell right on top of Pippin, still clutching at its long, saw-edged knife. "Put up your weapons," shouted Ugluk, "and let's have no more nonsense. We go straight west from here and down the stair. From there straight to the downs, then along the river to the forest. And we march day and night. That clear?" "Now," thought Pippin, "if it only takes that ugly fellow a little while to get his troop under control, I've got a chance." A gleam of hope had come to him. The edge of the black knife had snicked his arm, and then slid down to his wrist. He felt the blood trickling on his hand, but he also felt the cold touch of steel against his skin. The orcs were getting ready to march again, but some of the northerners were still unwilling, and the Isengarders slew 2 more before the rest cowed. There was much cursing and confusion. For the moment Pippin was unwatched. His legs were securely bound, but his arms were only tied about his wrists, and his hands were in front of him. He could move them both together, though the bonds were cruelly tight. He pushed the dead orc to one side, then hardly daring to breathe, he drew the knot of his wrist cord up and down against the blade of the knife. It was sharp, and the dead hand held it fast. The cord was cut. Quickly Pippin took it in his fingers and knotted it again into a loose bracelet of 2 loops, and slipped it over his hands. Then he lay very still. "Pick up those prisoners," shouted Ugluk. "Don't play any tricks with them. If they are not alive when we get back, someone else will die, too." An orc seized Pippin like a sack, put its head between his tied hands, grabbed his arms, and dragged them down until Pippin's face was crushed against its neck. Then it jolted off with him. Another treated Merry in the same way. The orc's claw-like hand had gripped Pippin's arms like iron. The nails bit into him. He shut his eyes and slipped back into evil dreams. Suddenly he was thrown onto the stony floor again. It was early night, but the slim moon was already falling westward. They were on the edge of a cliff that seemed to look out over a sea of pale mist. There was a sound of water falling nearby. So, let's discuss what happened. I mean, obviously the orcs, they got into a big quarrel, and some of them were killed, and this is what Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli had come across earlier when they saw some dead orcs, and they realized that there had been a form of a quarrel between the orcs, and that it seemed that the larger ones, the ones from Isengard, had won that quarrel. I believe that anybody could be redeemed who isn't Morgoth, Zelda man. I do believe that it is possible for the orcs to find their redemption, but very, very difficult, of course. All right, let's continue here. "The scouts have come back at last," said an orc close at hand. "Well, what did you discover?" growled the voice of Ugluk. "Only a single horseman, and he made off westwards. All's clear now." "Now, I dare say, but how long? You fools, you should have shot him. He'll raise the alarm. The cursed horse breeders will hear of this by morning. Now we'll have to leg it double quick." A shadow bent over Pippin. It was Ugluk. "Sit up," said the orc. "My lads are tired of lugging you about. We have got to climb down, and you must use your legs. Be helpful now. No crying out, no trying to escape. We have ways of paying for tricks that you won't like, though they won't spoil your usefulness for the master." He cut the thongs round Pippin's legs and ankles, picked him up by his hair, and stood him on his feet. Pippin fell down, and Ugluk dragged him up by his hair again. Several orcs laughed. Ugluk thrust a flask between his teeth and poured some burning liquid down his throat. He felt a hot, fierce glow flow through him. The pain in his legs and ankles vanished. He could stand. "Now for the other," said Ugluk. Pippin saw him go to Merry, who was lying close by, and kick him. Merry groaned. Seizing him roughly, Ugluk pulled him into a sitting position, then tore the bandage off his head. Then he smeared the wound with some dark stuff out of a small wooden box. Merry cried out and struggled wildly. The orcs clapped and hooted. "Can't take his medicine," they jeered. "Doesn't know what's good for him. Aye, we shall have some fun later." Hold on. Is it worth pointing out that the orcs are referred to as its? I think, Matt, it is worth pointing out. It is very interesting. It's sort of almost, dehumanizing. Of course, they aren't really human. And as far as we know, we know that the orcs, according to Tolkien, their matter of breeding was after the matter of the children of Iluvatar, meaning that they propagate themselves the same way that elves do, the same way that men do. But we don't really know what their gender roles are and how to tell a male orc from a female orc. I suppose they know that sort of thing. But we don't know that sort of thing. I get this question all the time on Quora. They're saying, well, how come we never see any female orcs? And I said, well, who's to say you haven't? Can you tell the difference? Are you going to get close enough to tell the difference? I don't think so. Not very much, right? It's interesting that another sort of creature that is always referred to with it pronoun is the Balrog, or Balrogs in general. Now, never he or she. The exception might be some of the very earliest writings about specifically Gothmog, because at this point he was Morgoth's son, which is something that was changed later on. And I would say that version of Gothmog, who was Morgoth's son, or Melko's son, because this is before Tolkien came up with the word Morgoth, he may have been the lord of the Balrogs, but not necessarily a Balrog himself, unless he was the propagator of all Balrogs after that. Of course, they weren't yet fallen angels at that point in the writing. But I do think it is worth pointing out. We really see that over and over again. So good catch there. All right, let's continue here. But at that moment, Ugluk was not engaged in sport. Here we see Ugluk referred to as he. So I think what we're seeing here, Matt, is that the person who is telling the story here, and we talk about this a little, who is the point of view character at any given point in time. In The Lord of the Rings, Book 1 and Book 2, it was almost consistently Frodo. Now, there were a few points where it wouldn't have been Frodo. The first chapter, probably not, because Frodo wasn't really introduced right away. Sam was not introduced right away. So we sort of have it where this is what they were told happened, and they wrote about it, because we have to remember that this is their chronicle. Now, in this part, what we see here is the focal character is absolutely Pippin. Now, it's following both Merry and Pippin, but he's the one telling the story. And why is it Pippin telling the story and not Merry? And the reason is because Pippin was the one that gained consciousness first. He was a little less hurt. Merry's got a blow to the head. He's a little woozy. He's not really knowing what's going on right now. And so Pippin is like, I don't know what that orc's gender is, so to me it's it. But then when he hears the voice and the name, okay, Ugluk, I'm hearing his voice, that's a guy. So we see it switch over to a male pronoun there. So I think what we're seeing here is Merry is just thinking of them as these sort of creatures that could go either way, and then once he hears their voice, we see the text sort of change pronouns there. And this really does go to my theory that there are, of course, female goblins all over the place, and they're probably warriors because they're a warrior culture. I don't think they're at home, playing happy housemaker in some sort of cave there. I think that you wouldn't be able to tell until they started speaking. So I think that's what we're seeing here. All right, let's continue here. But at that moment, Ugluk was not engaged in sport. He needed speed and had to humor unwilling followers. He was healing Merry in orc fashion, and his treatment worked swiftly. When he had forced a drink from his flask down the hobbit's throat, cut his leg bonds, and dragged him to his feet, Merry stood up, looking pale but grim and defiant and very much alive. The gash in his forehead gave him no more trouble, but he bore a brown scar to the end of his days. "Hello, Pippin," he said. "So you've come on this little expedition, too? Where do we get bed and breakfast?" "Now then," said Ugluk, "none of that. Hold your tongues. No talk to one another. Any trouble will be reported at the other end, and he'll know how to pay you. You'll get bed and breakfast all right, more than you can stomach." I have to comment on that. So this really shows, and I said this before, notice the speech pattern when Ugluk speaks compared to the speech pattern when Grishnak speaks. Grishnak is cunning. When he sees that things are getting deadly, he gets out of the way. He speaks intelligently. He's smart. Ugluk is, to put it mildly, stupid. He's not smart. And he says, "You'll get bed and breakfast more than you can stomach." What does that even mean? And I've said before that, because people say, well, why didn't Sauron use Uruk-hai? Right? They're bigger. They're stronger. They can travel in daytime. They can fight in the daytime. The sun doesn't bother them. Aren't they better? And I've pointed out that the Uruk-hai seem to be very, very dim-witted. And we also see the other end of it, because the Uruk-hai are a hybrid between orcs and men. They're more orc than man. The other side of that are the half-orcs, which come into play really in the Return of the King and in the whole denouement of the story. But the half-orcs are more men than orc. They have a little bit of orc in them. And a lot of them are in places like Bree. Some of them invade the Shire. They're pretty dim-witted themselves, And I think what we're seeing here is that when you mix these two species together, you get something that's not too bright. And Sauron may have realized this. he might have tried this at some point in the past himself and said this isn't worth it. They can follow only the very simplest of orders, but they're really dim. They're not very smart. Well, here's the thing. Whether or not orcs have souls is one of the greatest mysteries of Middle-earth, because Tolkien himself never solved that. He went through so many different ideas for what the orcs actually are. Anything from tainted elves down to soulless animals animated through necromancy. So I always tell people there are a lot of different ideas about what the orcs could actually be and whether or not they have souls. Tolkien never cracked it. So I'm not going to be able to, you know what I mean? So if anybody is telling you that they have the answer to that, they have an application. They have their idea of what it could be. It's not going to be the definitive answer because even the author didn't have a definitive answer. But yeah, it's almost like Homer Simpson would say something like this. Like, I could see one of Homer's children, probably Bart, saying, "Hey, when do I get bed and breakfast? I'll give you bed and breakfast more than you could stomach." And then like Lisa would be like, "What a strange thing to say." That wasn't very bright. Now, was it? And like I said, I've pointed out so many times that the Uruk-hai are extremely dim-witted creatures. They're not very smart. They're just very big and burly, and they make good sword fodder. They're good infantry, but not very good on their feet. They don't make good decisions, and they certainly aren't bright. And I'm not saying that all orcs. Certainly not all orcs are dumb like that. When we get to characters like Azog or Grishnak or whatever, you see a lot of cunning, and as a matter of fact, Azog, let's talk about him really briefly. Azog was a really nasty orc that lived in Moria, and he could write his name and he could make jokes. He definitely had more intelligence than the likes of Ugluk, when he decapitated Thorin's grandfather and he carved his name into the dwarf's head and he threw it out of the Moria gate, and he was flinging insults and everything. He knew how to really wind up the dwarves. He was very intelligent. This guy, like I said, this is Homer Simpson as an orc. This guy's not bright at all. The orc band began to descend a narrow ravine leading down into the misty plain below. Merry and Pippin, separated by a dozen orcs or more, climbed down with them. At the bottom they stepped onto grass, and the hearts of the hobbits rose. "Now straight on," shouted Ugluk. "West and a little north. Follow Lugdush." "But what are we going to do at sunrise?" said some of the northerners. "Go on running," said Ugluk. "What do you think? Sit on the grass and wait for the whiteskins to join the picnic?" "But we can't run in the sunlight." "You'll run with me behind you," said Ugluk. "Run, or you'll never see your beloved holes again. By the white hand, what's the use of sending our mountain maggots on a trip only half-trained? Run, curse you, run while night lasts." Then the whole company began to run with the long, loping strides of orcs. They kept no order, thrusting, jostling, and cursing. Yet their speed was very great. Each hobbit had a guard of 3. Pippin was far back in the line. He wondered how long he would be able to go on at this pace. He had had no food since the morning. One of his guards had a whip. But at present the orc liquor was still hot in him. His wits, too, were wide awake. Every now and again there came into his mind, unbidden, a vision of the keen face of Strider bending over a dark trail, and running behind. But what could even a ranger see except a confused trail of orc feet? His own little prince and Merry's were overwhelmed by the trampling of the iron-shod shoes before them and behind them and about them. They had gone only a mile or so from the cliff when the land sloped down into a wide, shallow depression, where the ground was soft and wet. Mist lay there, pale glimmering in the last rays of the sickle moon. The dark shapes of the orcs in front grew dim, and then were all swallowed up. "Aye, steady now!" shouted Ugluk from the rear. A sudden thought leaped into Pippin's mind, and he acted on it at once. He swerved aside to the right and dived out of the reach of his clutching guard. Head first into the mist, he landed sprawling on the grass. "Halt!" yelled Ugluk. There was for a moment turmoil and confusion. Pippin sprang up and ran, but the orcs were after him. Some suddenly loomed up right in front of him. No hope of escape, thought Pippin, but there is hope that I have left some of my own marks unspoilt upon the wet ground. He groped with his 2 tied hands at his throat, and unclasped the brooch with his cloak. Just as long arms and hard claws seized him, he let it fall. There I suppose it would lie until the end of time, he thought. I don't know why I did it. If the others have escaped, they've probably all gone with Frodo. A whip thong curled round his legs, and he stifled a cry. Enough, shouted Ugluk, running up. He's still got to run a long way yet. Make 'em both run. Just use the whip as a reminder. But that's not all, he snarled, turning to Pippin. I shan't forget. Payment is only put off. Leg it! That's the exact quote that I was thinking of, Matt. I'll practice you. Practice me? What the heck does that even mean? That's the exact quote that I was thinking of, Matt. Good catch there. Neither Pippin nor Merry remembered much of the latter part of their journey. Evil dreams and evil waking were blended into a long tunnel of misery, with hope growing ever fainter behind. They ran and they ran, striving to keep up the pace set by the orcs, licked every now and again with a cruel thong cunningly handled. If they halted or stumbled, they were seized and dragged for some distance. The warmth of the orc draught had gone. Pippin felt cold and sick again. Suddenly he fell face downward on the turf. Hard hands with rending nails gripped and lifted him. He was carried like a sack once more, and darkness grew about him. Whether the darkness of another night or a blindness of his eyes, he could not tell. Dimly he became aware of voices clamoring. It seemed that many of the orcs were demanding a halt. Ugluk was shouting. He felt himself flung to the ground, and he lay as he fell till black dreams took him. But he did not long escape from pain. Soon the iron grip of merciless hands was on him again. For a long time he was tossed and shaken, and then slowly the darkness gave way, and he came back to the waking world and found that it was morning. Orders were shouted, and he was thrown roughly onto the grass. I love that song. Where there's a whip, there's a way. Where there's a whip, there's a way. That's actually adapted from a line from The Return of the King, from the book. In the book, it was where there's a whip, there's a will. But of course, that wouldn't have worked as good in a Rankin Bass song. But there you have it. There he lay for a while, fighting with despair. His head swam, but from the heat in his body, he guessed that he had been given another draught. An orc stooped over him and flung him some bread and a strip of raw, dried flesh. He ate the stale grey bread hungrily, but not the meat. He was famished, but not yet so famished as to eat flesh flung at him by an orc, the flesh of he dared not guess what creature. He sat up and looked about. Merry was not far away. They were by the banks of a swift, narrow river. Ahead mountains loomed. A tall peak was catching at the first rays of the sun. A dark smudge of forest lay on the lowest slopes before them. There was much shouting and debating among the orcs. A quarrel seemed on the point of breaking out again between the Northerners and the Isengarders. Some were pointing back away south, and some were pointing eastward. Very well, said Ugluk. Leave them to me. No killing, as I've told you before, but if you want to throw away what we've come all the way to get, throw it away. I'll look after it. Let the fighting Uruk-hai do the work as usual. If you're afraid of the Whiteskins, run, run. There's the forest, he shouted, pointing ahead. Get to it. It's your best hope. Off you go. And quick, before I knock a few more heads off, to put some sense into the others. There was some cursing and scuffling, and then most of the Northerners broke away and dashed off, over 100 of them running wildly through the river towards the mountains. The hobbits were left with the Isengarders, a grim, dark band, 80 at least, of large, swart, slant-eyed orcs with great bows and short-bladed swords. A few of the larger and bolder Northerners remained with them. Now we'll deal with Grishnak, said Ugluk. But some even of his own followers were looking uneasily southwards. I know, he growled Ugluk. The cursed horse boys have gotten wind of us. But that's all your fault, Snaga. You and the other scouts ought to have your ears cut off. But we are the fighters. We'll feast on horse flesh yet. Or something better. Okay. So I want to talk specifically about a word that he used. Now, that sounds like a name, but it's actually not a name. He said, Snaga. So you would think that that's perhaps the name of an orc that he's saying, you, Snaga, that's your fault. Snaga is actually an orcish word that means slave, and it's sort of used as like almost like a slur for orcs that he feels are lesser than him, so he's calling them slaves as sort of an insult. So that's what was going on there. At that moment, Pippin saw why some of the troop had been pointing eastward. From that direction, there now came hoarse cries, and there was Grishnak again, and at his back a couple score of others like him, long-armed, crooked-legged orcs. They had a red eye painted on their shields. Ugluk stepped forward to meet them. "So you've come back," he said. "Thought better of it, eh?" "I've returned to see that orders are carried out and the prisoners safe," answered Grishnak. "Indeed," said Ugluk. "Waste of effort. I'll see that orders are carried out in my command. And what else did you come back for? You went in a hurry. Did you leave anything behind?" "I left a fool," snarled Grishnak. "But there were some stout fellows with him that are too good to lose. I knew you'd lead them into a mess. I've come to help them." "Splendid," laughed Ugluk. "But unless you've got some guts for fighting, you've taken the wrong way. Lugbers was your road. The Whiteskins are coming. What's happening to your precious Nazgul? Has he had another mount shot under him? Now, if you'd brought him along, that might have been useful, if these Nazgul are all they make out." So, of course, we know what the Nazgul are. Now, he mentions that... I'm just going to read what that he said. "Has he had another mount shot under him?" His grammar's not great. Like I said, he's not bright. But what he's saying is that one of the mounts of the Nazgul was shot out from under him. And, of course, this is referring to something that actually happened in the Fellowship of the Ring, where they were on the river and they heard flapping and they sensed some sort of like dark, evil presence in the mist on the other side of the river. And Legolas just sort of shot an arrow in that direction and something big fell down. That was Legolas shooting one of the Nazgul birds, what people usually refer to as fell beasts that they're riding on. So here we see that even the orcs are aware of such things. "Nazgul, Nazgul," said Grishnak, shivering and licking his lips as if the word had a foul taste that he savored painfully. "You speak of what is deep beyond the reach of your muddy dreams, Ugluk," he said. "Nazgul, all that they make out. One day you'll wish you had not said that, ape." He snarled fiercely. "You ought to know that they're the apple of the great eye. But the winged Nazgul, not yet, not yet. He won't let them show themselves across the great river yet. Not too soon. They're for the war and for other purposes." So, this actually answers a question that a lot of people had in the Fellowship of the Ring. Why were the winged Nazgul only staying on the east bank of the Anduin River? Why didn't they come across? And now we know why. Sauron has told them not to reveal themselves yet. That they're for the war. Meaning that he is saving them for when he finally attacks Gondor in earnest. Which is something that he's actually planning to do somewhat down the road, actually. And of course he's going to be goaded into doing it early. And we'll see about that after not too long. "You seem to know a lot," said Ugluk. "More than is good for you, I guess. Perhaps those in Lugbers might wonder how and why. But in the meantime, the Uruk-hai of Isengard can do the dirty work as usual. Don't stand slavering there. Get your rabble together. The other swine are legging it to the forest. You'd better follow. You wouldn't get back to the great river alive. Right off the mark. Now, I'll be on your heels." The Isengarders seized Merry and Pippin again, and slung them on their backs. Then the troops started off. Hour after hour they ran, pausing now and again only to sling the hobbits to fresh carriers, either because they were quicker and hardier, or because of some plan of Grishnak's. The Isengarders gradually passed through the orcs of Mordor, and Grishnak's folk closed in behind. Soon they were gaining also on the northerners ahead. The forest began to draw nearer. Pippin was bruised and torn. His aching head was grated by the filthy jowl and hairy ear of the orc that held him. Immediately in front were bowed backs and tough, thick legs going up and down, unresting, as if they had been made of wire and horn, beating out the nightmare seconds to an endless time. In the afternoon, Ugluk's troop overtook the northerners. They were flagging in the rays of the bright sun. winter sun shining in a pale, cool sky though it was. Their heads were down and their tongues lolling out. "Maggots," jeered the Isengarders. "You're cooked. The Whiteskins will catch you and eat you. They're coming." A cry from Grishnak showed that this was not mere jest. Horsemen, riding very swiftly, had indeed been sighted, still far behind, but gaining on the orcs, gaining on them like a tide over the flats on the folk straying in the quicksand. The Isengarders began to run with a redoubled pace that astonished Pippin. A terrific spurt it seemed for the end of a race. Then he saw that the sun was sinking, falling behind the misty mountains. Shadows reached over land. The soldiers of Mordor lifted their heads and also began to put on speed. The forest was dark and close. Already they passed a few outlying trees. The land was beginning to slope upward ever more steeply, but the orcs did not halt. Both Ugluk and Grishnak shouted, spurring them on to a last great effort. So, really not much to say here, but I wanted to point out that it's interesting. We see the northerners, the orcs that came out of Moria, are very tired, and they're not doing too well with the whole sunlight thing. And one of the Isengarders, we're not sure which one, says, "You're cooked," which I think is a rather amusing thing, because we see this in very, very modern slang, where people say you're cooked, as in a way of saying you're doomed. And here we see a very early example of cooked being used in that instance, proving really that there is nothing new under the earth when it comes to language. Sometimes we just reuse something very old. "They will make it yet. They will escape," thought Pippin. And then he managed to twist his neck so as to glance back with one eye over his shoulder. He saw the riders away eastward were already level with the orcs, galloping over the plain. The sunset gilded their spears and helmets and glinted in their pale, flowing hair. They were hemming the orcs in, preventing them from scattering, and driving them along the line of the river. He wondered very much what kind of folk they were. He wished now that he had learned more in Rivendell, and looked more at maps and things, but in those days the plans for the journey seemed to be in the more competent hands. And he had never reckoned with being cut off from Gandalf or from Strider, and even from Frodo. All that he could remember about Rohan was that Gandalf's horse, Shadowfax, had come from that land. That sounded hopeful, as far as it went. But how will they know that we are not orcs, he thought. I don't suppose they've ever heard of hobbits down here. I suppose I ought to be glad that the beastly orcs look like being destroyed, but I would rather be saved myself. The chances were that he and Merry would be killed together with their captors before ever the men of Rohan were aware of them. A few of the riders appeared to be bowmen, skilled at shooting from a running horse. Riding swiftly into range, they shot arrows at the orcs that straggled behind, and several of them fell. And the riders wheeled away out of the range of the answering bows of their enemies, who shot wildly, not daring to halt. This happened many times, and on one occasion arrows fell among the Isengarders. One of them, just in front of Pippin, stumbled and did not get back up again. Night came down, without the riders closing in for battle. Many orcs had fallen, but fully 200 remained. In the early darkness the orcs came to a hillock. The eaves of the forest were very near, probably no more than 3 furlongs away, but they could go no further. The horsemen had encircled them. A small band disobeyed Ugluk's command and ran on toward the forest. Only 3 returned. "Well, here we are," sneered Grishnak. "Fine leadership. I hope the great Ugluk will lead us out again." "Put those halflings down," ordered Ugluk, taking no notice of Grishnak. "You, Lugdush, get the 2 others and stand guard over them. They are not to be killed unless the filthy whiteskins break through, understand? As long as I'm alive, I want 'em. But they're not to cry out, and they're not to be rescued. Bind their legs." The last part of the order was carried out mercilessly, but Pippin found that for the first time he was close to Merry. The orcs were making a great deal of noise, shouting and clashing their weapons, and the hobbits managed to whisper together for a while. "I don't think much of this," said Merry. "I feel nearly done in. I don't think I could crawl away far, even if I were free." "Lembas," whispered Pippin. "Lembas, I've got some, have you?" "I don't think they've taken anything but our swords." "Yes, I have a packet in my pocket," answered Merry, "but it must be battered to crumbs. Anyway, I can't put my mouth in my pocket." "You won't have to, But just then a savage kick warned Pippin that the noise had died down and the guards were watchful. Of course, what Pippin was referring to there was that he's actually already cut his bonds, and he's only pretending to have his hands bound, which is very useful. Okay, One moment here. I accidentally... Okay, there we go. Yes, I am going through all of them, actually. We actually started with The Hobbit, and I did 4 streams going through The Hobbit, and then another 10 streams going through The Fellowship of the Ring. And if you wish to catch up, there's playlists on my channel, which you can put on at any time. Of course, all of the videos there are available to everybody. For a little while, they're members only, but it's been so long that they're all available to everybody. And we're going to do all of Tolkien's books, of course. I was thinking actually about the order of doing them, because after the Lord of the Rings, it's sort of like, well, where do we go from here? Do we go to the Silmarillion, or do we go to Unfinished Tales, or do we perhaps do something different? And I think I might do like a poll or something where we could see what you guys think. Maybe we could do the letters, or maybe we could do something like Beowulf or something that he translated, to take a break before delving into sort of the deeper lore of Unfinished Tales and the Silmarillion and the history of Middle-earth and all that, you know. So, yeah, we'll eventually get through everything. It's going to be quite the journey, though. Quite the journey. The night was cold and still. All round the knoll in which the orcs were gathered, little watchfires sprang up, golden red in darkness, a complete ring of them. They were within a long bow shot, but the riders did not show themselves against the light, and the orcs wasted many arrows shooting at the fires, until Ugluk stopped them. The riders made no sound. Later in the night, when the moon came out of the mist, then occasionally they could be seen, shadowy shapes that glinted now and again in the white light, and they moved in ceaseless patrol. "They'll wait for the sun, curse them," growled one of the guards. "Why don't we get together and charge through? What's old Ugluk think he's doing, I should like to know?" "I dare say you would," snarled Ugluk, stepping up from behind. "Meaning I don't think at all, eh? Curse you. You're as bad as the other rabble, the maggots and the apes of Lugburz. No good trying to charge with them, they just squeal and bolt. And there are more than enough of these filthy horseboys to mop up our lot on the flat. There's only one thing those maggots can do. They can see like gimlets in the dark, but those whiteskins have better night eyes than most men, from all I've heard. And don't forget the horses. They can see the night breeze, or so it's said. Still, there's one thing the fine fellows don't know. Mauher and his lads are in the forest, and they should turn up any time now." Ugluk's words were enough, apparently, to satisfy the Isengarders. But the other orcs were both dispirited and rebellious. They posted a few watchers, but most of them lay on the ground, resting in the pleasant darkness. It did indeed become very dark again, for the moon passed westward into thick cloud, and Pippin could not see anything a few feet away. The fires brought no light to the hillock. The riders were not, however, content to merely wait for the dawn and let their enemies rest. A sudden outcry on the east side of the knoll showed that something was wrong. It seemed that some of the men had ridden in close, slipped off their horses, crawled to the edge of the camp, and killed several orcs, and then had faded away again. Ugluk dashed off to stop a stampede. Pippin and Merry sat up. Their guards, Isengarders, had gone with Ugluk. But if the hobbits had any thought of escape, it was soon dashed. A long, hairy arm took each of them by the neck and drew them close together. Dimly they were aware of Grishnak's great head and hideous face between them. His foul breath was on their cheeks. He began to paw at them and feel them. Pippin shuddered as hard, cold fingers groped down his back. "Well, my little ones," said Grishnak in a soft whisper, "enjoying your nice rest, or not? A little awkwardly placed, perhaps, swords and whips on one side and nasty spears on the other? Little people should not meddle in affairs that are too big for them." His fingers continued to grope. There was a light like a pale but hot fire behind his eyes. The thought came suddenly into Pippin's mind, as if caught direct from the urgent thought of his enemy. "Grishnak knows about the ring. He's looking for it while Ugluk is busy. He probably wants it for himself." Cold fear was in Pippin's heart, yet at the same time he was wondering what he could make of Grishnak's desire. Okay. Let me just... The Silmarillion, we talked about this a little while ago. Believe it or not, the Silmarillion is only 300 pages long. It's about 300 pages long. Here, I have it right here. See, this is the thing. The Silmarillion is not nearly as big of a read as is made out. Okay, well, that's the index. That's still the index. There's a big index here. Okay, so the actual last page is 292. So there's 292 pages in the Silmarillion, several more pages of things like family trees and indexes and such, right? And here, the Two Towers is longer. It's 352 pages. However, the Silmarillion is really dense. And it's dense because there's thousands of characters and names of places, and it flits back and forth, and it goes at a really fast pace. There's no, like, taking a whole page to describe what a hill looks like. Instead, 40 years could go by in that same page, and a whole bunch of things happen. The War of Wrath was a big event in Middle-earth, you know. It takes up about a page of the Silmarillion. It was a 40-year war, you know, that ended the First Age. It was the final defeat of Morgoth, and it's not even a full page, to be honest. It's close to a full page. So that's what makes the Silmarillion challenging, is not so much that it's a long read, but that it's sort of a difficult read. And I've said that when we were doing The Hobbit, I could get almost all the way through a chapter before I had to stop and talk about stuff. And with The Lord of the Rings, it's like, okay, I can go like maybe a page or two, and then I'll have to stop and talk about stuff. With the Silmarillion, it's going to be like almost every line we're going to have to explain something, right? Silmarillion. If you can't roll your eyes, it's perfectly fine to say Silmarillion. But interesting fact, by the way, there was a band in the 80s. They wanted to call themselves the Silmarillion, and they were afraid of being sued or being told they can't use the name. So they shortened it, and they called themselves Marillion. And they were very popular for a brief time in the 80s. They're still around. They're not as popular as they were. They almost did the soundtrack to Highlander, which is really interesting. They were asked to do the soundtrack to Highlander, and they couldn't do it because of their touring schedule. So that's where Queen came in. They wanted Marillion because they were Scottish, but that didn't happen, obviously. I imagine being in the other sort of world, the world where they did the soundtrack to Highlander, and Queen did not. And imagine if they managed to do like a big concept album based on the Silmarillion, like kind of like Blind Guardian, you know. All right, let's continue here. Where were we? Here we are. I don't think you'll find it that way, he whispered. It isn't easy to find. Find it, said Grishnak. His fingers stopped crawling and gripped Pippin's shoulder. Find what? What are you talking about, little one? For a moment Pippin was silent. Then suddenly in the darkness he made a noise in his throat. Gollum! Gollum! Nothing, my precious, he added. The hobbits felt Grishnak's fingers twitch. Oh, hissed the goblin softly. That's what he means, is it? Oh, very, very dangerous, my little ones. Perhaps, said Merry, now alert and aware of Pippin's guess. Perhaps, and not only for us. Still, you know your own business best. Do you want it or not? And what would you give for it? Do I want it? Do I want it? Said Grishnak, as if puzzled, but his arms were trembling. What would I give for it? What do you mean? We mean, said Pippin, choosing his words carefully, that it's no good groping in the dark. We could save you time and trouble, but you must untie our legs first, or we'll do nothing and say nothing. My dear tender little fools, hissed Grishnak. Everything you have and everything you know will be got out of you in due time. Everything! You'll wish there was more than you could tell to satisfy the questioner. Indeed you will quite soon. We shan't hurry the inquiry, oh dear no. What do you think you've been kept alive for, my dear little fellows? Please believe me when I say that it was not out of kindness. That's not even one of Ugluk's faults. I find it quite easy to believe, said Merry. But you haven't got your prey home yet, and it doesn't seem to be going your way, whatever happens. If we come to Isengard, it won't be the great Grishnak that benefits. Saruman will take all that he can find. If you want anything for yourself, now's the time to do a deal. Grishnak began to lose his temper. The name of Saruman seemed especially to enrage him. Time was passing, and the disturbance was dying down. Ugluk or the Isengarders might return at any moment. Have you got it, either of you? He snarled. Got him! Got him! Said Pippin. Untie our legs, said Merry. They felt the orc's arms trebling violently. "Curse you, you filthy little vermin," he hissed. "Untie your legs, I'll untie every string in your bodies. Do you think I can't search you to the bones? Search you, I'll cut you both to quivering shreds. I don't need the help of your legs to get you away, and have you all to myself." We're still on the same chapter. The chapter is the Uruk-hai, the third chapter of Book 3, which is the first half of the Two Towers. Suddenly he seized them. The strength in his long arms and shoulders was terrifying. He tucked them one under each armpit and crushed them fiercely to his sides. A great stifling hand was clapped over each of their mouths. Then he sprang forward, stooping low. Quickly and silently he went until he came to the edge of the knoll. There, choosing a gap between the watchers, he passed like an evil shadow out into the night, down the slope and away westward, toward the river that flowed out of the forest. In that direction there was a wide open space with only one fire. Seems like like I said, it's a dense read, Chewie. It's a very dense read, but there really are only 290 somewhat pages to the Silmarillion, whereas each individual volume of The Lord of the Rings is actually longer than the Silmarillion. Not as dense, though. Easier to read. And it is going to take us a very long time to get through the Silmarillion, not because it's long, but because, like I said, almost every line we're going to have to stop and explain, which is going to help you guys, because people read the Silmarillion all the time and they go, I gotta make heads or tails of this thing. It's like reading stereo instructions. If you get that reference, please let me know in the chat. But anyway, I'm going to break it down for you guys. You guys are going to have a real deep appreciation for the Silmarillion when we get to it. After going a dozen yards, he halted, peering and listening. Nothing could be seen or heard. He crept slowly on, bent almost double. Then he squatted and listened again. Then he stood up as if to risk a sudden dash. At that very moment, the dark form of a rider loomed up right in front of him. A horse snorted and reared. A man called out. Grishnak flung himself on the ground flat, dragging the hobbits under him. Then he drew his sword. No doubt he meant to kill his captives rather than allow them to escape or be rescued, but it was his undoing. The sword rang faintly and glinted a little in the light of the fire away to his left. An arrow came whistling out of the gloom. It was aimed with skill or guided by fate, and it pierced his right hand. He dropped the sword and shrieked. There was a quick beat of hoofs, and even as Grishnak leaped up and ran, he was ridden down, and a spear passed through him. He gave a hideous shivering cry and lay still. The hobbits remained flat on the ground, as Grishnak had left them. Another horseman came riding swiftly to his comrade's aid. Whether because of some special keenness of sight, or because of some other sense, the horse lifted and sprang lightly over them, but its rider did not see them, lying covered in their elven cloaks, too crushed for the moment and too afraid to move. Draw a door. There we go. Stone Toad got the reference. Stone-Toad got the reference. That was a Beetlejuice quote there. Draw a door. Absolutely. This is like reading stereo instructions. Very good. Very good. One of my favorite comedy horror films. At last Merry stirred and whispered softly, "So far so good, but how are we to avoid being spitted?" The answer came almost immediately. Oh dear, the answer is that we're being raided. We are being raided. Scottish Maiden is raiding us on Twitch there. Toast raid, toast raid, toast raid, toast raid. Give it to us raw and wriggling. Yes, precious. Keep your nasty chipses. Oh, did you leave me a comment earlier? I'm going to try to get to that soon. The reason that I haven't done it yet is the website that I was using to stream it from is gone. So I have to get like a copy of it that I could play on my computer and continue that. So I haven't forgotten about the Rankin Bass Hobbit. You love the voice. Thank you, Scottish Maiden. Thank you for the raid. We are currently reading and analyzing the Two Towers here. We are on the third chapter, the Uruk-hai. So thank you everybody that just came in. Let's see, we've got a skooma lizard, and we got good guy in bad lands, and last Evro's kiss. We've seen you before, so thank you, and melodic Hammond. Thank you for everyone that came in. We are also live on YouTube as well. The people are clamoring for it. Yes, I know. I will get back to that. I'm sorry that a lot of things came up and then the website wasn't working anymore and I kind of forgot about it for a little while, but it's been in the back of my head like, hey, the Rankin Bass Hobbit, the Rankin Bass Hobbit, you know. I will get back to that. Beetlejuice was excellent. I enjoyed it. It's not, you know, as iconic and amazing as the original film, but it was very good. All right, let's continue here. The answer came almost immediately. The cries of Grishnak had roused the orcs. From the yells and screeches that came from the knoll, the hobbits guessed that the disappearance had been discovered. Ugluk was probably knocking off a few more heads. Then suddenly the answering cries of orc voices came from the right, outside the circle of watchfires, from the direction of the forest and the mountains. Mauhur had apparently arrived, and was attacking the besiegers. There was the sound of galloping horses. The riders were drawing in their ring close round the knoll, risking the orc arrows so as to prevent any sortie, while the company rode off to deal with the newcomers. Suddenly, Merry and Pippin realized that without moving, they were now outside the circle. There was nothing between them and escape. The Two Towers is your favorite. You're mad about the Rohirrim. I'm very fond of everything to do with Rohan as well. Did you happen to watch Elmhing? What was it? The War of the Rohirrim, the animated film. I thought there was one part that I didn't like, but I liked most of it. I thought it was very good. Welcome in, everybody. All right, let's continue here. Now, said Merry, if only we had our legs and hands free, we might get away, but I can't touch the nuts and I can't bite them. No need to try, said Pippin. I was going to tell you I've managed to free my hands. These loops are only left for show. You'd better have a bit of lembas first. He slipped the cords off his wrists and fished out a packet. The cakes were broken but good, still in their leaf wrappings. The hobbits each ate 2 or 3 pieces. The taste brought them back the memory of fair faces and laughter and wholesome food and quiet days now far away. For a while they ate thoughtfully, sitting in the dark, heedless of the cries and sounds of the battle nearby. Pippin was the first to come back to the present. So, you haven't watched it yet? It's very good. There's only one part that I was like, okay, that's not very smart, but it had to do with the way that a siege tower was being built. I didn't like the way that they built the siege tower. But anyway, isn't this such a hobbitish thing, right? Merry and Pippin have been through an extremely traumatic experience. They have been carried and dragged and whipped and made to run and sort of poisoned and beaten and just overall molested by these orcs for miles and miles and miles. And now they've escaped. And what's the first thing they think of? Food. Now, actually, Pippin is being very, very pragmatic here. He's being very sensible. He knows that Merry got injured. He knows that Merry is worse off than he is right now. And he's saying, let's get some food in you, because we're going to have to go and we can't stay here and we need our strength. But it really is just the most hobbitish thing ever. Hey, when's breakfast, you know? You like the people of Rohan is an absolutely fantastic land. When we get to Unfinished Tales, one of my favorite stories is in there, which is Cirion and Eorl, which is about the founding of Rohan. And it's really, really cool. I don't know if you've ever read that, Time Lord, but really, really great, the origin of Rohan. All right, let's continue here. We must be off, he said. Half a moment. Grishnak's sword was lying close at hand, but it was too heavy and clumsy for him to use, so he crawled forward, and finding the body of a goblin, he drew from its sheath a long, sharp knife. With this he quickly cut their bonds. Now for it, he said. When we've warmed up a bit, perhaps we shall be able to stand again and walk, but in this case we'd better start by crawling. They crawled. The turf was deep and unyielding, and that helped them, but it seemed a long, slow business. They gave the watchfire a wide berth, and wormed their way forward bit by bit until they came to the edge of the river, gurgling away in the black shadows under its deep banks. They then looked back. The sounds had died away. Evidently Mauhur and his lads had been killed or driven off. The riders had returned to their silent, ominous vigil. It would not last very much longer. Already the night was old. In the east, which had remained unclouded, the sky was beginning to grow pale. We must get under cover, said Pippin, or we shall be seen. It will not be any comfort to us if these riders discover that we are not orcs after we are dead." He got up and stamped his feet. "Those cords have cut me like wires, but my feet are getting warm again. I could stagger on now. What about you, Merry?" Merry got up. "Yes," he said, "I can manage it. Lembas does put heart into you. A more wholesome sort of feeling, too, than the heat of that orc draught. I wonder what it's made of. Better not to know, I expect. Let's get a drink of water to wash away the thought of it." "Not here. The banks are too steep," said Pippin. "Forward now." So, now this is really interesting. I want to talk about the role of the hobbits as leaders. Now, if we talk about the four primary hobbits, Frodo and Sam and Merry and Pippin, everybody sort of thinks Frodo's the leader, right? Frodo's the main character. He's the one that they're all following. Sam is following him because he sees himself as being loyal to Frodo. And Merry and Pippin think this is our cool older cousin whom we love and will go anywhere with him. And I pointed this out when we were reading the Fellowship of the Ring, that very early on in the story, Merry specifically had a leadership role, especially when going through the Old Forest and then negotiating with people in Bree. It seemed that Merry really was the leader until Aragorn showed up. He was the one that had, the most wealth. He was the one that was very well spoken. He was the one with a lot of confidence. And here we're seeing a little bit of the reversing, where for once Pippin is sort of taking care of Merry. Merry's been knocked in the head pretty bad, and he's a little off right now. And he's like, "Hey, water, let's drink that." And Pippin's like, "No, stop. If we go down there, we won't be able to come back up. Let's keep going forward." So we're seeing an instance of Pippin actually emerging as a bit of a leader here, which is really cool. And of course, we've seen Frodo as a leader, and we will see Sam as a leader. We see all of the hobbits lead in one way or another, and that's really cool. And there's a little bit of Bilbo in all of them, is what I'm getting at. All right. Here we go. Let's see. Oh, where did I leave off? Here. They turned and walked side by side, slowly along the line of the river. Behind them the light grew in the east. As they walked they compared notes, talking lightly in hobbit fashion of the things that had happened since their capture. No listener would have guessed from their words that they had suffered cruelly, and had been in dire peril, going without hope towards torment and death. Or even that now, as they knew well, they had little chance of ever finding friend or safety again. "You seem to have been doing well, Master Took," said Merry. "You will almost get a chapter in old Bilbo's book if I ever get a chance to report to him. Good work, especially guessing that hairy villain's little game and playing up to him. But I wonder if anyone will ever pick up your trail and find that brooch. I should hate to lose mine, but I'm afraid yours is gone for good. I shall have to brush up my toes if I'm to get level with you. Indeed, Cousin Brandybuck is going in front now. This is where he comes in. I don't suppose you have much notion where we are, but I spent my time in Rivendell rather better. We are walking west along the Entwash. The butt end of the Misty Mountains is in front, and Fangorn Forest." Even as he spoke, the dark edge of the forest loomed up straight before them. Night seemed to have taken refuge under its great trees, creeping away from the coming dawn. "Lead on, Master Brandybuck," said Pippin, "or lead back. We have been warned against Fangorn, but one so knowing will not have forgotten that." "I have not," answered Merry, "but the forest seems better to me all the same than turning back into the middle of a battle." He led the way under the huge branches of the trees. Old beyond guessing they seemed. Great trailing beards of lichen hung from them, blowing and swaying in the breeze. Out of the shadows the hobbits peeped, gazing back down the slope, little furtive figures that in the dim light looked like elf children in the deeps of time, peering out in the wild wood in wonder at their first dawn. I have to talk about that paragraph. That is absolutely huge. We get a little bit of the deepest lore there. By the way, actually, Scottish Maiden, are you still there? If you're still there, I think oh, where did I put it? I have something to show you, actually. Where did I put it? Oh, no. I can't find the thing. Oh, dear. Well, I don't know if she's still there, but... Oh, here we are. Oh, but they fell out. Well, at least I know where to look. Scottish Maiden, do you happen to still be there? I know we rated you. You rated me, rather, and you're a big fan of Gollum. and I wanted to show you. I'm going to show it regardless, because I think a lot of people will think it's cool. I should have showed this in my most recent video, actually, but I had forgotten about it. But let me show you here. I got myself a little, they're called Bitty Pops. They're sort of they're sort of similar to Funko Pops, but they're tiny, and they're encased in these little tiny glass cubes. A friend of mine got me these as a gift, and one of them is Gollum. So I thought I'd show that there. There's little Smeagol there. I also, the other ones that I got here, I'll show them all. There we go. But I thought Scottish Maiden specifically might want to see that. Here's Gandalf. And I have Frodo here. Oh, they're so tiny, it's hard to grasp them out of this thing. Yeah, here's Frodo. And then, you know, basically you buy the set that has Gollum and Gandalf and Frodo, and then you get a mystery one, which is one of the more rare ones. And in my case, I got Aragorn, which is really cool. Apparently the most rare ones are Boromir and Saruman. But having Aragorn I think is cooler, right? Aragorn's better than that, in my opinion at least. I just realized I can't see the YouTube chat all of a sudden. There we go. Okay. All right, let's continue onwards here. 1 second, actually. Let me refresh this just because I think it's... All right, there we go. Aragorn's back. Yeah. Okay, there we go. I'm sorry. I need to refresh that. We're almost at the end of this chapter here. But I have to talk about this. I'm going to read that last paragraph again because it's very important here. Just a bit of it here. Little furtive figures that in the dim light looked like elf children in the deeps of time, peering out of the wild wood in wonder at their first dawn. Okay, so the deeps of time is a phrase that's also used by Aragorn a little bit later when he's referring to his sword, Anduril, which was originally Narsil, and he says that it was forged by Telchar in the deeps of time, meaning the first age or possibly earlier. And what we're talking about here is we're talking about the first dawn. And elf children, this could be literal. It could mean very, very young elves, or it could just mean the race of elves as they were young, because the elves are in Tolkien's world are actually older than the sun. And like I said, we're getting a little bit of the deep lore here. We're getting a little bit of Silmarillion thrown into the Two Towers, just as we had a lot of it actually thrown into the Fellowship of the Ring. A little bit it was thrown into The Hobbit even. So the world was originally lit by these two gigantic lamps that were on top of these large towers. There was one to the north and one to the south. And then Melkor comes and he breaks them. So now the world is dark. And so Varda, who is one of the Valar, she makes a whole bunch more stars because she knows that eventually the elves are going to awaken. The Valar know that the elves are coming. They don't know when or where. And she's like, we're going to give them some kind of light because they're going to go to the Undying Lands. They're going to have the two trees, but in Middle-earth, it's going to be dark. So eventually, when the sun first comes up, can you imagine what that would have been like to the elves? They only know the stars. They only know the night. And then all of a sudden the sun comes up. That's why Galadriel said as beautiful and as terrible as the morning and the night. Which, you know, in the movie was as the dawn, which is also acceptable, even though it's not the exact line. So, you know, they're saying when the elves were young, they saw the first sunrise, which is really cool. Of course, Tolkien also had an idea that that's not even true and that the sun was always there, but that was towards the end of his life. He was a little depressed. We don't know if he would have kept those ideas, really. If you're ever interested in reading about some of the really crazy, wild ideas that Tolkien had towards the end of his life, there's a book called Morgoth's Ring, and there's a section in it called Myths Transformed, where it just talks about some of the really wacky stuff that he came with late in life that was never really gotten past just a few ideas and a brief outline, you know. But let's finish this chapter because we're pretty much at the end of it. Far over the great river and the brown lands, leagues upon grey leagues away, the dawn came, red as flame. Loud rang the hunting horns to greet it. The riders of Rohan sprang suddenly to life. Horn answered horn again. Merry and Pippin heard, clear in the cold air, the neighing of war horses and the sudden singing of many men. The sun's limb was lifted in an arc of fire above the margin of the world. Then with a great cry the riders charged from the east. The red light gleamed on mail and spear. The orcs yelled and shot all the arrows that remained to them. The hobbits saw several horsemen fall, but their line held up on the hill and over it, and wheeled round and charged again. Most of the raiders that were left alive then broke and fled this way and that, pursued one by one to the death. But one band, holding together in a black wedge, drove forward resolutely in the direction of the forest. Straight up the slope they charged towards the watchers. Now they were drawing near, and it seemed certain that they would escape. They had already hewn down 3 riders that barred their way. "We have watched too long," said Merry. "There's Ugluk. I don't want to meet him again." The hobbits turned and fled deep into the shadows of the wood. So it was that they did not see the last stand when Ugluk was overtaken and brought to bay at the very edge of Fangorn. There he was slain at last by Eomer, the 3rd Marshal of Rohan, who dismounted and fought him sword to sword. And over that wide field the keen-eyed riders hunted down the few orcs that had escaped and still had strength to fly. Then, when they had laid their fallen comrades in a mound and had sung their praises, the riders made a great fire and scattered the ashes of their enemies. So ended the raid, and no news of it came ever back to either Mordor or Isengard, but the smoke of the burning rose high to heaven and was seen by many watchful eyes. Yes, as a matter of fact, that is the end of that chapter. And the next chapter, chapter 4, is called Treebeard. And I think, much like the previous stream, we're only going to get through 2 chapters. So that might be the going for the 2 towers for the most part, 2 chapters per stream. That's generally the pace that we were on for the Fellowship of the Ring, although some of the chapters, like the Council of Elrond, took up an entire stream, because that's a very long chapter with a lot of things to explain. Now, Treebeard, let's talk about Treebeard as a character very briefly. So Treebeard is what's known as an Ent. And you may ask, well, what is that? What is Ent? Ent is an Old English word that just means giant. He is a giant. And Tolkien had the idea that there were 2 sorts of giants in the world. There were the tree Ents and the stone Ents. Now, it is not to say that the tree Ents are made of trees or that they're wooden or anything like that. They look like trees from a distance if you kind of squint your eyes, but they really are their very own thing. They are not trees. They are not walking trees. They are the shepherds of the trees. The stone Ents are not made of stone like you see in the Hobbit movie or anything like that. They are just giants that live in the mountains, while the tree Ents are giants that live in the wood. And what's interesting is that Tolkien's original idea for Ents was that they were all evil and nefarious, really. They weren't necessarily all, in league with Morgoth or Sauron, but they were all villains. And Treebeard, specifically, was going to be this nasty sort of guy that worked for Saruman and captured Merry and Pippin, and of course that didn't happen. Because what happened? I'll tell you what happened. Tolkien had the idea of putting a character into The Lord of the Rings based off of one of his close friends, whom he called Jack. We know him as C.S. Lewis. So he had the idea of making a character based on C.S. Lewis, and that is where we get Treebeard, the version of Treebeard that we're familiar with. C.S. Lewis was a very tall guy. He had a loud, booming voice. He walked with large legs. He had long strides, and he was said to be sort of an overwhelming person. Like when he talked, everybody else was quiet. So he basically put C.S. Lewis into the book, just like C.S. Lewis had actually 2 different characters in his books that were based off of J.R.R. Tolkien. They were pretty close friends, and they would do these sort of things to sort of make fun to each other, I believe. Etunaz eater. That may be. Let me see. Let's see. Hold on. Let me get my notes for Ent. One moment here. I'm going to help you out here. Oh, that's not the right thing. Where are my notes? Hold on. Okay, let's see. Oh, get that out of here. Oh, looking in the wrong place. One moment. I'm gonna help you out here. Here we are. Okay, so Ent is giant, but it is actually derived from the Proto-West Germanic unti. And it still meant giant, unti. The word you're talking about, etunaz, is actually not related, I don't think. It's Proto-West Germanic, unti. There are a lot of similar words, that's the thing, you know, but the one that we would go with would be unti, the Proto-West Germanic, which you would conjugate it entes onto the dative form being the closest to unti. Yeah, unfortunately I think I didn't mean to do that. I think they're the one that you're talking about might be unrelated, but let's actually go back to the whole C.S. Lewis thing. So Treebeard becomes a very different type of creature. Now, what's interesting is you say, well, there are Ents in the Silmarillion, right? Wasn't that an older work? Here's the thing. Sometimes Tolkien was working backwards, and he would put things in the Silmarillion because he had created them in the Lord of the Rings and he knew he needed to explain them. So that's why we get Ovalle and Yavanna, which explains not only the creation of the dwarves, but the Ents as well. The Stone Ents seem to be just sort of lost, right? We don't hear much about them. They're sort of mentioned in the New Shadow, which is like the one chapter that he wrote of a Lord of the Rings sequel that never saw the light of day. But yet, it all changed when he decided that Treebeard was basically going to be C.S. Lewis, and that's where we get this. Is Old Man Willow a leftover idea of the Ents being evil? You know, he's not an Ent, though. So, I believe that Old Man Willow is very unique because he is actually a tree, and that would make him possibly a Huorn, which a Huorn is a tree that has become Entish, a tree that has its own will and can move around and that sort of thing. And we absolutely know that there are Huorns in the Old Forest. However, Old Man Willow, while he's able to, you know, swallow Merry and Pippin, and he's able to speak to them in a way that Merry's able to understand, and he's able to understand Tom Bombadil. He doesn't move around, though. He doesn't get up and move. So I think what we have with Old Man Willow is he is a spirit that is trapped inside of a tree, possibly by Tom Bombadil. That has always been my thought, that there was sort of a malevolent spirit, and that Bombadil sang a merry little song and said, "You're a tree now, enjoy it." You know, so I think that's what it was. I don't think that it was a leftover from that idea of the Ents being nefarious. Like I said, there's really nothing left of that, unfortunately, except if you, like I said, if you go into, I believe, the Treason of Isengard, that book will talk about it quite a bit. All right, Chapter 4, Treebeard. Meanwhile, the hobbits went with as much speed as the dark and tangled forest allowed, following the line of the running stream westward and up toward the slopes of the mountains, deeper and deeper into Fangorn. Slowly their fear of the orcs died away, and their pace slackened. A queer, stifling feeling came over them, as if the air were too thin or too scanty for breathing. At last Merry halted. "We can't go on like this," he panted. "I want some air." "Let's have a drink at any rate," said Pippin. "I'm parched." He clambered onto a giant tree root that wound down into the stream, and stooping low, he drew up some water in his cupped hands. It was clear and cold, and he took many draughts. Merry followed him. The water refreshed them and seemed to cheer their hearts. For a while they sat together on the brink of the stream, dabbling their sore feet and legs, and peering round at the trees that stood silently about them, rank upon rank, until they faded into grey twilight in every direction. "I suppose you haven't lost us already," said Pippin, leaning back against a great tree trunk. "We can at least follow the course of this stream, the Entwash or whatever you call it, and get out again the way we came." "We could if our legs would do it," said Merry, "and if we could breathe properly." "Yes, it's all very dim and stuffy in here," said Pippin. "It reminds me somehow of the old room in the great place of the Tooks, away back in the Smeals at Tookborough, a huge place where the furniture has never been moved or changed for generations. They say the old Took lived in year after year, while he and the room got older and shabbier together, and it has never been changed since he died a century ago. And old Gerontius was my great-great-grandfather. That puts it back a bit. But that is nothing to the feeling of this wood. Look at those weeping, trailing beards and whiskers of lichen, and most of the trees seem to be half covered with ragged, dry leaves that have never fallen. Untidy. I can't imagine what spring would look like here if it ever comes. Still less a spring cleaning." You've read that there may be some metathesis for Etunaz onto, possibly from Etun. Okay, see that? I can see that. It's not in my notes, but I can definitely see that. That makes sense to me, actually. Now, I just wanted to comment on one minor thing here, is that he mentions the old Took, which was Bilbo's grandfather, and his great-great-grandfather, and he calls him Old Gerontius, and this is sort of like just Tolkien sort of having a joke here. Gerontius is a very silly name for a hobbit. Most of the hobbits have silly names, and most of the hobbits' names don't actually mean anything. Like what does Bilbo mean? Nothing. What does Frodo mean? Nothing. Things like that. Gerontius, though, is definitely something that means old. So, of course, the old Took's real name being Gerontius is rather amusing, almost as if his parents knew when he was born, this one's going to live to be 130 years old. "But the sun, at any rate, must peep in sometimes," said Merry. "It does not look or feel at all like Bilbo's description of Mirkwood. That was all dark and black, and the home of dark black things. This is just dim and frightfully tree-ish. You can't imagine animals living here at all, or staying for long." No hobbits," said Pippin, "and I don't like the thought of trying to get through it either. Nothing to eat for 100 miles, I should guess. How are our supplies?" "Low," said Merry. "We ran off with nothing but a couple of spare packets of lembas, and left everything else behind." They looked at what remained of the elven cakes, broken fragments, for about 5 meagre days, and that was all. "And not a wrap or a blanket," said Merry. "We shall be cold tonight, whichever way we go." "Well, we'd better decide on the way now," said Pippin. "The morning must be getting on." Just then they became aware of a yellow light that had appeared, some way further down in the wood. Shafts of sunlight seemed to suddenly have pierced the forest roof. "Hullo," said Merry. "The sun must have run to a cloud while we've been under these trees, and now she has run out again. Or she has climbed high enough to look down through some opening. It isn't far. Let us go and investigate." So notice that Merry refers to the sun as she. You will always see that the sun is female, always female pronouns in Tolkien's work, and the moon is the masculine one with the male pronouns, of course referencing the Maya Aryan, who carries the sun through the sky, Tilion carrying the moon through the sky. They found it was further than they thought. The ground was rising steeply still, and it was becoming increasingly stony. The light grew broader as they went on, and soon they saw that there was a rock wall before them, the side of a hill or the abrupt end of some long root thrust out by the distant mountains. No trees grew on it, and the sun was falling full on its stony face. The twigs of the trees at its foot were stretched out stiff and still, as if reaching out to the warmth. Where all had looked so shabby and grey before, the wood now gleamed with rich browns, and with the smooth black greys of bark like polished leather. The boles of the trees glowed with a soft green like young grass, early spring on a fleeting vision if it was about them. In the face of the stony wall there was something like a stair, natural perhaps, and made by the weathering and splintering of the rock, for it was rough and uneven. High up, almost level with the tops of the forest trees, there was a shelf under a cliff. Nothing grew there but a few grasses and weeds at its ledge, and one old stump of a tree with only 2 bent branches left. It looked almost like the figure of some gnarled old man standing there, blinking in the morning light. "Up we go," said Mary joyfully. "Not for a breath of air and a sight of the land." They climbed and scrambled up the rock. If the stair had been made, it was for bigger feet and longer legs than theirs. They were too eager to be surprised at the remarkable way in which the cuts and sores of their captivity had healed, and their vigor had returned. They came at length to the edge of the shelf, almost at the feet of the old stump. Then they sprang up and turned round with their backs to the hill, breathing deep and looking out eastward. They saw that they had only come some 3 or 4 miles into the forest. The heads of the trees marched down the slopes towards the plain. There, near the fringe of the forest, tall spires of curling black smoke went up, wavering and floating towards them. "The wind's changing," said Mary. "It's turned east again. It feels cool up here." "Yes," said Pippin. "I'm afraid this is only a passing gleam, and it will all go grey again. What a pity. This shaggy old forest looks so differently in the sunlight. I almost felt like I liked the place."
"Almost felt like you liked the forest. That's good. That's uncommonly kind of you," said a strange voice. "Turn round and let me have a look at your faces. I almost feel that I dislike you both, but do not let us be hasty. Turn round." A large knob-knuckled hand was laid on either of their shoulders, and they were twisted round, gently but irresistibly. Then 2 great arms lifted them up. They found that they were looking at a most extraordinary face. It belonged to a large, manlike, almost troll-like figure, at least 14 foot high, very sturdy, with a tall head and hardly any neck. Whether it was clad in stuff like green and grey bark, or whether that was its hide, was difficult to say. At any rate, the arms, at a short distance from the trunk, were not wrinkled, but covered with a brown, smooth skin. The large feet had 7 toes each. The lower part of the long face was covered with a sweeping grey beard, bushy, almost twiggy at the roots, thin and mossy at the ends. But at the moment the hobbits noted little but the eyes. These deep eyes were now surveying them, slow and solemn, but very penetrating. They were brown, shot with a green light. Often afterwards Pippin tried to describe his first impression of them. One felt as if there was an enormous wall behind them, filled with ages of memory and long, slow, steady thinking, but their surface was sparkling with the present, like sun shimmering on the outer leaves of a vast tree or on the ripples of a very deep lake. I don't know, but it felt as if something that grew in the ground, asleep you might say, or just feeling itself, something between root tip and leaf tip, between deep earth and sky, had suddenly waked up, and was considering you with the same slow care that it had given to its own inside affairs for endless years. It really is beautiful writing, isn't it? I mean, Tolkien really knew how to paint a picture, which is why I think, Elm, by the way, that when he wrote his allegorical take on his writing process, which was a lovely little tiny story called Leaf by Nigel, he represented himself as a painter who was very good at drawing leaves, and he drew a picture of a leaf, and it looked so real and so clear, and then eventually he drew the branch and other leaves, and then a whole tree, and then a forest, and then, it expanded, and that's how his writing process works, So he really paints a picture, as we'd say. "Hroom, murmured the voice, a deep voice like a very deep woodwind instrument. "Very odd indeed. Do not be hasty, that is my motto. But if I had seen you before I heard your voices, I liked them. Nice little voices, they reminded me of something I cannot remember. If I had seen you before I heard you, I should have just trodden on you, taken you for little orcs, and found my mistake afterward. Very odd you are indeed, root and twig. Very odd."
Yeah, Leaf is a fantastic story. We will, of course, be reading that at some point on this stream. Well, not this particular stream, but on this channel. Oh, we actually determined that last time when we read that part. That was Saruman. That was Saruman, the one that scared away the horses, because Gandalf said he didn't do any such thing, so that had to have been Saruman. We did sort of have the discussion of, well, why would he just scare away the horses, And I always thought if Saruman was a lot smarter, he would have taken Aragorn's invitation to sit by the fire and speak with them. He might have learned a lot of great things, but of course, evil is often not very smart, as we see. Pippin, though still amazed, no longer felt afraid. Under those eyes, he felt a curious suspense, but not fear. "Please," he said, "who are you? And what are you?" A queer look came into the old eyes, a kind of wariness. The deep wells were covered over.
Now," answered the voice. "Well, I am an Ent, or that is what they call me. Yes, Ent is the word. The Ent I am, you might say, in your manner of speaking. Fangorn is my name, according to some. Treebeard, others make it. Treebeard will do."
"An Ent," said Merry. "What is that?" "But what do you call yourself? What's your real name?"
"Ooh, now," replied Treebeard. "Ooh, now that would be telling. Not so hasty. And I am doing the asking. You are in my country. What are you, I wonder? I cannot place you. You do not seem to come in the old lists I learned when I was young. But that was a long, long time ago, and they may have made new lists. Let me see. How did it go? Learn now the lore of living creatures. First came the free peoples. Eldest of all, the elf children. Dwarf the delver, darker as houses. Ent the earthborn, old as mountains. Man the mortal, master of horses. Beaver the builder, buck the leaper. Bear, bee hunter, boar the fighter. Hound is hungry, hare is fearful. Eagle in eyrie, ox in pasture, hart-horn crowned, hawk is swiftest, swan the whitest, serpent coldest. How did it go? Room-toom. It was a long list, but anyway, you do not seem to fit in anywhere.
"We always seem to have got left out of the old lists and the old stories," said Merry. "Yet we have been around for quite a long time. We're hobbits." "Why not make a new line?" said Pippin. "Half-grown hobbits, the hole-dwellers. Put us in amongst the four next to man, the big people, and you've got it." Now let me just back up just a bit here, just to mention something from his poem here, the list, as he calls it. He talks about elves, dwarves, ents, men. And then he starts going into animals, starting with a beaver. But then we have a bear. Bear, bee, hunter. So this is Tolkien having a little bit of a laugh here as well, because Tolkien is always making these sorts of references. And we see it a lot. Sid Kemp had said that a lot of the early part of The Two Towers makes reference to another work, one that he had translated in his time, and of course that's Beowulf. And if we were to say, well, what does the name Beowulf mean? And it means eater of honey. And in Tolkien's tale, The Hobbit, he had a character who was very similar to Beowulf, who was named Beorn. And Beorn is a word that means two different things. It means man, and it means bear. But the literal meaning is eater of honey. So it's interesting that, he's sort of making a Beowulf reference here. He's saying that bears are bee hunters. And once again, I have to bring up the almost certainly apocryphal story of somebody attending a meeting for the Tolkien Society and stating that there was a 6-hour argument among the scholars of whether or not there were bees in Middle-earth, and eventually they came to the conclusion that there were, because there were, Mediseld was the name of the hall of the king of Rohan, which translates to mead hall, and because there's such thing as mead, that means there's honey, which means there's bees. But there's bees mentioned all over the place before you even get to Mediseld, There were bees in The Hobbit. Beorn is a bear, a eater of honey. He served honey. There were bees there. It's just, and here he mentions bear, bee, hunter. So the fact that any Tolkien scholar could sit there and argue against the fact that there are bees in Middle-earth is patently ridiculous, which is why I say that it's an apocryphal story. But it is indicative of the sort of discussions that we get into with each other. I mean, I've been on the phone with Matt for hours just talking about, Tom Bombadil or whatever, and we sometimes agree and we sometimes disagree. But yes. It's similar to Slavic, too, where bears are called honey eaters. Yeah, in a lot of languages, you see it. You see it all over the place, that bears are associated with honey or hunting bees or some sort, and Beowulf is one of the oldest tales that we have. It's one of the first written tales, anyway, from oral tradition. Let's continue onwards here.
Not bad, said Treebeard. That would do. So you live in holes, eh? It sounds very right and proper. Who calls you hobbits, though? That does not sound elvish to me. Elves made all the old words. They began it.
Let's talk about that very briefly. Elf is what they're called now, but the word that the Valar came up with was Eldar. Elf is derived from Eldar, at least in universe. We know that it's a much older Germanic phrase out of universe. But what's interesting here is the similar thing. El is a star. El is star. Eldar is the people under the stars, the star people, so to speak, right? But they didn't call themselves the elves. They called themselves the Quendi, and that means speakers, because they were, as far as they knew, the first beings in the world to speak human language. When the first three elves, Imen, Tata, and Enel, Imen, Enel, and Tata, came across the first three elf women who were still asleep, they immediately fell in love, and they started to think, what are we going to say to these hot chicks once they wake up? We got to come up with songs and poems and all sorts of things to express our feelings, and that's when language is invented. So they called themselves the Quendi. Quendi means speakers. And yeah, they began it. When he says they began it, he's talking about language. They began the concept of language. Nobody else calls us hobbits. We call ourselves that, said Pippin.
Come now, not so hasty. You call yourselves hobbits, but you should not go telling just anybody. You'll be letting out your own right names if you're not careful.
We aren't careful about that, said Merry. As a matter of fact, I'm a Brandybuck, Merry-a-Dick Brandybuck, though most people call me just Merry. And I'm a Took, Peregrine Took, but I'm generally called Pippin, or even Pip.
But you are hasty folk, I see, said Treebeard. I am honored by your confidence, but you should not be too free all at once. There are Ents and Ents, you know, or some are Ents and things that look like Ents but ain't, as you might say. I'll call you Merry and Pippin, if you please. Nice names, for I am not going to tell you my name. Not yet, at any rate. A queer half-knowing, half-humorous look came with a green flicker into his eyes. For one thing, it would take a long while. My name is growing all the time, and I've lived a very long time, so my name is like a story. Real names tell you the story of the things they belong to in my language, in the old Entish, as you might say. It is a lovely language, but it takes a long time to say anything in it, because we do not say anything in it unless it is worth taking a long time to say and to listen to. But now, and the eyes became very bright and present, seeming to grow smaller and almost sharp. What is going on? What are you doing in it all? I can see and hear and smell and feel a great deal from this la rumba kamanda lindor buruma. Excuse me, that is part of my name for it. I do not know what the word is in the outside languages, you know. The thing we are on, where I stand and look out on fine mornings and think about the sun and grass and the clouds and the unfolding of the world. What is going on? what is Gandalf up to? And these Buraru?
He made a deep rumbling noise, like a discord on a great organ.
These orcs and young Saruman down at Isengard. I like news, but not too quick now.
Shows how young the hobbits are as a race. That is absolutely part of it, but what's also part of it is the fact that their names don't generally actually mean anything. There are exceptions. The Took names tend to have meanings, and Hobbit, the ladies, the Hobbit ladies, their names tend to just be like flowers and trees and things like that. But a lot of times it's just, it's just sort of nonsense, Let me see. I mean, Samwise, his name means something, but it just means halfwit, and that's not very nice. And Aragorn had a thought about that as well, but we'll get to that when we get to the appendix. Just to mention here, there's something he said that I wanted to comment on. Young Saruman, yeah. He says Saruman is young. Of course, Saruman is eternal. This guy's been around since before the universe, of course. But this shows you not many people or creatures out there really know what the wizards are. As far as Treebeard is concerned, this Saruman guy's only been around for about 2,000 years at this point, so he's pretty young. There was quite a lot going on, said Merry, and even if we tried to be quick, it would take a long time to tell. But you told us not to be hasty. Ought we to tell you anything so soon? Would you think it rude if we asked you what you were going to do with us, and which side you were on, and how do you know Gandalf?
Yes,
and did you know Gandalf?
Yes, I do know him, the only wizard that really cares about trees, said Treebeard. Do you know him?
Yes, said Pippin sadly. We did. He was a great friend, and he was our guide.
Then I can answer your other questions, said Treebeard. I am not going to do anything with you, not if you mean by that do something to you without your leave. We might do some things together. I don't know about sides. I go my own way, but your way may go along with mine for a while. But you speak of Master Gandalf as if he was in a story that had come to an end.
Yes, we do, said Pippin sadly. The story seems to be going on, but I'm afraid Gandalf has fallen out of it.
Come now, said Treebeard. Oh, well.
He paused, looking long at the hobbits.
Well, I do not know what to say. Come now.
If you would like to hear more, said Merry, we will tell you, but it will take some time. Would you like to put us down? Couldn't we sit here together in the sun while it lasts? You must be getting tired of holding us up.
Tired? No, I am not tired. I do not easily get tired, and I do not sit down. I am not very, bendable. But there, the sun is going in. Let us leave this. Did you say what you call it?
Hill, suggested Pippin. Shelf? Step, suggested Merry. Treebeard repeated the words thoughtfully.
Hill, yes, that was it, but it is a hasty word for a thing that has stood here ever since this part of the world was shaped. Never mind, let us leave it and go.
Where shall we go? Said Merry. Gandalf isn't like Garfield? What? What are you saying? You wonder if he'd like lasagna, though. Well, I mean, anybody would like lasagna. Lasagna's delicious. That's a very, very silly thing to say, though, Moogle.
To my home, or one of my homes, answered Treebeard. Is it far? I do not know. You might call it far, perhaps, but what does that matter?
Well, you see, we have lost all our belongings, said Merry. We have only a little food.
Oh, you need not trouble about that, said Treebeard. I can give you a drink that will keep you green and growing for a long, long while, and if we decide to part company, I can set you down outside my country at any point you choose. Let us go.
Holding the hobbits gently but firmly, one in the crook of each arm, Treebeard lifted up first one large foot and then the other, and moved them to the edge of the shelf. The root-like toes grasped the rocks, then carefully and solemnly he stalked down from step to step and reached the floor of the forest. At once he was set off with long, deliberate strides through the trees, deeper and deeper into the woods, never far from the stream, climbing steadily up towards the slopes of the mountains. Many of the trees seemed asleep, or as unaware of him as any other creature that merely passed by, but some quivered and some raised up their branches above his head as he approached. All the while as he walked, he talked to himself in a long running stream of musical sounds. The hobbits were silent for some time. They felt, oddly enough, safe and comfortable, and they had a great deal to think and wonder about. At last Pippin ventured to speak again. "Please, Treebeard," he said, "could I ask you something? Why did Celeborn warn us against your forest? He told us not to risk getting entangled in it."
Did he now?" rumbled Treebeard. "And I might have said much the same. If you were going the other way, do not risk getting entangled in the woods of Lorelin-Doranan. That is what the elves used to call it, but now they make the name shorter. Lothlorien they call it. Perhaps they are right. Maybe it is fading, not growing. Land of the Valley of Singing Gold, that was it, once upon a time. Now it is the Dream Flower. Ah, well, but it is a queer place, and not just for anyone to venture in. I am surprised that you ever got out, but much more surprised that you ever got in. That has not happened to strangers for many a year. It is a queer land. And so is this. Folk have come to grief here. Aye, they have to grief. Lorelin-Doranan, Lindor-Lundor, Malinor-Linelion, Or and Malin, he hummed to himself. They are fading rather than falling behind the world there, I guess, he said. Neither this country nor anything else outside the Golden Wood is what it was when Celeborn was young still. That is what they used to say. Things have changed. But it is still true in places.
"What do you mean?" said Pippin. "What is true?"
"The trees and the Ents," said Treebeard. "I do not understand all that goes on myself, so I cannot explain it to you. Some of us are still true Ents and live enough in our own fashion. But many are growing sleepy, going tree-ish, as you might say. Most of the trees are just trees, of course, but many are half awake. Some are quite wide awake, and a few are getting Entish. That is going on all the time. When that happens to a tree, you find that some have bad hearts. Nothing to do with their wood. I do not mean that. Why, I knew some good old willows down the Entwash, gone long ago, alas. They were quite hollow. Indeed, they were falling all to pieces, but as quiet, as sweet-spoken as a young leaf. And then there are some trees in the valleys under the mountains, sound as a bell, and bad right through. That sort of thing seems to spread. There used to be some very dangerous parts in this country. There are still some very black patches."
"Like the old forest away to the north, do you mean?" asked Merry.
Aye, something like that, but much worse. I do not doubt there is some shadow of the great darkness lying there still away north, and bad memories are handed down. But there are hollow dales in this land where the darkness has never been lifted, and the trees are older than I am. Still we do what we can. We keep off strangers and the foolhardy, and we train and we teach, we walk and we weed. We are tree herds, we old Ents. Few enough of us are left now. Sheep get like shepherd, and shepherds like sheep, it is said. But slowly, and neither have long in the world. It is quicker and closer with trees and Ents, and they walk down the ages together. For Ents are more like elves, less interested in themselves than men are, and better at getting inside other things. And yet again Ents are more like men, more changeable than elves are, and quicker at taking the colour of the outside, you might say. Or better than both, for they are steadier and keep their minds on things longer. Some of my kin look just like trees now, and need something great to rouse them. And they speak only in whispers, but some of my trees are limb-lithe, and many can talk to me. Elves began it, of course, waking trees up and teaching them to speak and learning their tree talk. They always wished to talk to everything, the old elves did. But then the great darkness came, and they passed away over the sea, or fled into far valleys, and hid themselves, and made songs about days that would never come again. Never again.
Discord on a great organ, is that an anachronism? No, I don't think that it is, because we hear of there being all sorts of instruments, and when we really think about it, there's not much reason that we can't imagine organ being the name of some sort of instrument in Tolkien's world. As a matter of fact, if we followed the conceit of the author, that he did not write The Lord of the Rings, that he merely translated it from Westron into English, then we can say that, some sort of instrument was mentioned, and he chose to translate it as organ, much as in The Hobbit, he used the phrase Christmas tree, which doesn't make sense, really, unless you consider the author's conceit that he's just passing along the story and translating it into what our common speech is. I wanted to mention here when he talks about the elves waking up the trees and talking to everything, and then the great darkness came, and it should be mentioned that in the text, great and darkness are capitalized, the great darkness. He is talking, of course, about Morgoth. Let's move on here.
Aye, there was all one wood once upon a time from here to the mountains of Loon, and this was just the east end. Those were the broad days. Time was I could walk and sing all day and hear no more than the echo of my own voice in the hollow hills. The woods were like the woods of Lothlorien, only thicker, stronger, younger, and the smell of the air. I used to spend a week just breathing.
Treebeard fell silent, striding along, and yet making hardly a sound with his great feet. Then he began to hum again, and passed into a murmuring chant. Gradually the hobbits became aware that he was chanting to them.
In the willow meads of Tassarin I walked in the spring. Ah, the sight and the smell of the spring in Nan Tassarian. And I said that it was good. I wandered in summer in the elm woods of Osirian. Ah, the light and the music of the summer by the 7 rivers of Osir. And I thought that was best. To the beaches of Neldoreth I came in the autumn. Ah, the gold and the red and the sighing of leaves in the autumn of Tarna Neldor. It was more than my desire. To the pine trees upon the highlands of Dorthonion I climbed in the winter. Ah, the wind and the whiteness and the black branches of winter upon Orodna Thorn. My voice went up and sang in the sky. And now all those lands lie under the wave. As I walk in Aberona, in Toromorna, in Aldaloma, in my own land, in the country of Fangorn, where the roots are long, and the years lie thicker than the leaves, in Toranoralome.
Hey there, Walter. How's it going? Could Treebeard have been a part of the group of Ents in the first age that had a skirmish with the dwarves? I think it's absolutely possible. He talks about various lands in Beleriand that he visited. He walked all over Beleriand. He mentions Dorthonion. He mentions Orod Nathon. The first one that he mentions, though, is interesting. He says Tassarinan. Tassarinan is not really mentioned all that much in the Silmarillion. It doesn't seem all that important. But later, in the Return of the King, when Treebeard is speaking to Galadriel and speaking to Celeborn, and he asks Galadriel when they will meet again, and she says, not until the world is remade, and we will meet in the land of Tassarinian, which is interesting because that's a land in Beleriand, so she's saying that the world will be remade and that Beleriand will be above the waves once more. And because that's the first land in Beleriand that he mentions, and it's because that's where she says that she will meet Treebeard, I would say that might be where the Ents first awoke. That might be their cradle of life, so to speak. Yeah. Organ in Greek itself meant instrument or tool. So absolutely, yes, it could just be a general term for instrument. Absolutely. So that's also not far from where that skirmish where the dwarves was. So absolutely, he could have been part of that party that with Beren that had fought the dwarves that came out of Doriath. He ended and strode on silently, and in all the wood, as far as ear could reach, there was not a sound. The day waned, and dusk was twined about the boles of the trees. At last the hobbits saw, rising dimly before them, a steep, dark land. They had come to the feet of the mountains and the green roots of tall Methedros. Down the hillside, the young Entwash, leaping from its springs high above, ran noisily from step to meet them. On the right of the stream there was a long slope, clad with grass now grey in the twilight. No trees grew there, and it was open to the sky. Stars were shining already in lakes between shores of cloud. Treebeard strode up the slope, hardly slackening his pace. Suddenly before them the hobbits saw a wide opening. 2 great trees stood there, one on either side, like living gateposts, but there was no gate, save their crossing and interwoven boughs. As the old Ent approached, the trees lifted up their branches, and all their leaves quivered and rustled, for they were evergreen trees, and their leaves were dark and polished, and gleamed in the twilight. Beyond them was a wide, level space, as though the floor of a great hall had been cut in the side of the hill. On either hand the walls sloped upward, until they were 50 feet high or more, and along each wall stood an aisle of trees that also increased in height as they marched inwards. At the far end the rock wall was sheer, but at the bottom it had been hollowed back into a shallow bay with an arched roof. The only roof of the hall save the branches of the trees, which at the inner end overshadowed all the ground, leaving only a broad open path in the middle. A little stream escaped from the springs above, and leaving the main water, fell tinkling down the sheer face of the wall, pouring in silver drops like a fine curtain in front of the arched bay. The water was gathered again in a stone basin in the floor between the trees, and thence it spilled and flowed away beside the open path, out to rejoin the Entwash in its journey through the forest. Let's see. If an elf was sent back to Middle-earth by Mandos as soon as he dies, is he playing Dark Souls? Could someone make a Souls-like game on Beleriand? You know, it's interesting, Gilliard. I remember watching a trailer once for a video game that looked like that sort of thing, right? I was watching this and I was like, what is this? You know, what is this that I'm looking at? I don't even know what this is. And it just seemed almost like they were going for that sort of thing. Like, is this something like based on the Silmarillion or something? What is going on here? And then it turned out to be a game called Elden Ring, which I never was all that interested in once I found out that George R.R. Martin had a hand in it. I'm not very fond of his writing, or indeed his philosophy on writing. But, yeah. The only thing is the elves don't need to visit the place that they died to gain their essence back, thankfully. That is handled by the Valar. Okay, let's continue here. Here we are, said Treebeard, breaking his long silence. I have brought you about 70,000 inch strides, but what that comes to in the measurement of your land I do not know. Anyhow, we are near the roots of the last mountain. Part of the name of this place might be Welling Hall if it were turned into your language. I like it. We will stay here tonight. He set them down on the grass between the aisles of the trees, and they followed him toward the great arch. The hobbits now noticed that as he walked his knees hardly bent, but his legs opened in a great stride. He planted his big toes, and they were indeed big and very broad, on the ground first, before any other part of his feet. For a moment Treebeard stood under the rain of the falling spring and took a deep breath. Then he laughed and passed inside. A great stone table stood there, but no chairs. At the back of the bay it was already quite dark. Treebeard lifted 2 great vessels and stood them on the table. They seemed to be filled with water, but he held his hands over them, and immediately they began to glow. One with a golden and the other with a rich green light, and the blending of 2 lights lit the bay, as if the sun of summer was shining through a roof of young leaves. To answer your question, okay, I'm going to be fair. Tolkien could barely finish his own work either. But the reason I don't like George Martin is just, like I said, I don't like his philosophy towards writing. I don't like what he feels the reason for telling stories is, because he's overly concerned with minutia, and not the sort of minutia that Tolkien was concerned with, but he's concerned with. I mean, his whole thing was he felt, what is Aragorn's tax policy, and that's where he came up with the idea for his story. But his story is not that original. It's based on the Wars of the Roses. It's very derivative. There's even a little bit of Final Fantasy Tactics thrown in there. So it's just sort of wild that it... I mean, if people enjoy it, I think that's great for them. But when I attempted to read his work, I read a bit of the book, A Game of Thrones, and I really just didn't like it. It felt like a Stephen Donaldson sort of fantasy, which was not to my taste. As another, the big series, the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, and I read, about half of his first book in that series, which is called Lord Fal's Bane, and I just found it to be rather detestable. I didn't like it at all. So really what it comes down to is I just don't like his philosophy towards writing, He disenchants his work with very gritty details. Yeah, that's part of it. I think what he writes isn't so much fantasy. He writes medieval exploitation, That's what it basically comes down to. And if you want to read the sort of story that that Martin is very, very fond of writing, but you want to read a good version. Oh, near. What? I'm about to hold up the book and I can't find... That's why I need to order that bookshelf. I need to order that little book. Oh, there it is. There's a little bookshelf that I'm going to order off of Amazon that will organize all of this. Here it is. This is the book that you should read if you want the kind of thing that, the kind of story that Martin tells, but written really just, a lot better. The Children of Húrin. It has all the things that Martin's fond of, but yeah. But yeah, I couldn't get through Lord Fal's Bane. I couldn't get through A Game of Thrones. I never watched the TV show. I've seen it on in the background, there are people that I know that are very fond of it, and that's good for them and everything, but I'm not. It's just not to my taste, really. But if you like it, that's fine. I'm not going to tell you not to like it, I'm not that kind of person. All right, where were we? Let's see. Here we are. At last he set the bowl down again. He sighed. Now we can talk easier. You can sit on the floor, and I will lie down. That will prevent the drink from rising to my head and sending me to sleep. On the right side of the bay there was a great bed on low legs, not more than a couple of feet high, covered deep in dried grass and bracken. Treebeard lowered himself slowly onto this, with only the slightest sign of bending at his middle, until he lay at full length with his arms behind his head, looking up at the ceiling, upon which the lights were flickering like the play of leaves in the sunshine. Merry and Pippin sat beside him on pillows of grass. "Now tell me your tale, and do not hurry," said Treebeard. The hobbits began to tell him the story of their adventures ever since they left Hobbiton. They followed no very clear order, for they interrupted one another continually, and Treebeard often stopped the speaker and went back to some earlier point, or jumped forward, asking questions about later events. They said nothing whatever about the ring, and did not tell him why they set out, or where they were going to, and he did not ask for any reasons. He was immediately interested in everything, in the Black Riders, in Elrond and Rivendell, in the Old Forest and Tom Bombadil, in the mines of Moria, and in Lothlorien and Galadriel. He made them describe the Shire and its country over and over again. He said an odd thing at this point. "You never see any Ents round there, do you?" he asked. "Well, not Ents. Entwives, I should really say." "Entwives," said Pippin. "Are they like you at all?"
Yes, well, no, I do not really know now, said Treebeard, thoughtfully. But they would like your country, so I just wondered.
Treebeard was, however, especially interested in everything that concerned Gandalf, and most interested of all in Saruman's doings. The hobbits regretted very much that they knew so little about them, only a rather vague report by Sam of what Gandalf had told the council. But they were clear at any rate that Ugluk and his troop had come from Isengard, and spoke of Saruman as their master. Said Treebeard, when at last their story had wound and wandered through the battle of the orcs and the riders of Rohan.
Well, well, that is a bundle of news and no mistake. You have not told me all, no indeed, not by a long way. But I do not doubt that you are doing as Gandalf would wish. There is something very big going on, that I can see, and what it is maybe I shall learn in good time, or in bad time, by root and twig, but it is a strange business. Up sprout a little folk that are not in the old lists, and behold, the 9 forgotten riders reappear to hunt them, and Gandalf takes them on a great journey, and Galadriel harbours them in Caras Galadon, and orcs pursue them down the leagues of Wilderland. Indeed, they seem to be caught up in a great storm. I hope they weather it.
And what about yourself? Asked Merry.
I have not troubled about the great wars, said Treebeard. They mostly concern elves and men. That is the business of wizards. Wizards are always troubled about the future. I do not like worrying about the future. I am not altogether on anybody's side, because nobody is altogether on my side, if you understand me. Nobody cares for the woods as I care for them, not even elves nowadays. Still, I take more kindly to elves than others. It was the elves that cured us of dumbness long ago. That was a great gift that cannot be forgotten, though our ways have parted since. And there are some things, of course, whose side I am altogether not on. I am against them altogether, these Booraroom.
He again made a deep rumble of disgust.
These orcs and their masters. I used to be anxious when the shadow lay on Mirkwood, but when it was removed to Mordor, I did not trouble for a while. Mordor is a long way away, but it seems that the wind is setting east, and the withering of all woods may be drawing near. There is naught that an old Ent can do to hold back that storm. He must weather it or crack. But Saruman now. Saruman is a neighbour. I cannot overlook him. I must do something, I suppose. I have often wondered lately what I should do about Saruman.
Who is Saruman? Asked Pippin. Do you know anything about his history?
Saruman is a wizard, answered Treebeard. More than that I cannot say. I do not know the history of wizards. They appeared first after the great ships came over the sea, but if they came with the ships I can never tell. Saruman was reckoned great among them, I believe. He gave up wandering about and minding the affairs of men and elves some time ago. You would call it a very long time ago, and he settled down at Angrenost, or Isengard, as the men of Rohan call it. He was very quiet to begin with, but his fame began to grow. He was chosen to be head of the White Council, they say, but that did not turn out too well. I wonder now if even then Saruman was not turning to evil ways. But at any rate, he used to give no trouble to his neighbours. I used to talk to him. There was a time when he was always walking about my woods. He was polite in those days, always asking my leave, at least when he met me, and always eager to listen. I told him many things that he would never have found out by himself, but he never repaid me in like kind. I cannot remember that if he ever told me anything, and he got more and more like that. His face, as I remember it, I have not seen it for many a day, became like windows in a stone wall, windows with shutters inside. I think that I now understand what he is up to. He is plotting to become a power. He has a mind of metal and wheels, and he does not care for growing things, except as far as they serve him for the moment. And now it is clear that he is a black traitor. He is taken up with foul folk, with the orcs. Worse than that, he has been doing something to them, something dangerous, for those Isengarders are more like wicked men. It is a mark of evil things that come in the great darkness that they cannot abide the sun. But Saruman's orcs can endure it, even if they hate it. I wonder what he has done. Are they men he has ruined, or has he blended the races of orcs and men? That would be a black evil.
Okay, so let me answer this question that Walter asked. Is it possible that when Saruman went east with the Blue Wizards upon his return, something in the east shook him or caused his downward spiral towards what he became? No, I don't think so. First of all, it's important to note that he didn't go with the Blue Wizards. He just had sort of the same idea that they did. He might have been looking for them, but we don't know what he saw. We know that he came back and they did not. They stayed out there. What really started it was when he uncovered the secret that Círdan had given Gandalf a ring of power, and that started his whole jealousy towards Gandalf and his whole belief that everybody was sort of working against him. And another big part of it was, and Treebeard just alluded to this just now, when he became head of the White Council, because the head of the White Council has been around before the Wizards. They didn't create it. Galadriel created it in the Second Age. She was the head of the White Council. And when the Wizards came, she wished to cede her leadership of the White Council specifically to Gandalf. And that really, really upset Saruman. So he's got this jealousy of Gandalf, this intense envy that has led him to very dark thoughts. He has felt disrespected. As a matter of fact, I could go back further. I could go back to when they were in the Undying Lands, and they asked for these volunteers, and only 2 volunteers there were. There was him and Alatar. And then Alatar says, "Can I take my buddy Polando with me?" That's the other Blue Wizard, right? And then 2 things happen back to back that upset him. One is Manwë picks another one and says that Aloran guy, that's Gandalf, he's going to go with you. And Gandalf didn't even want to go, but he was sort of conscripted into the whole thing. And Varda made a comment. She said, "Not as the third." And it sort of got into Saruman saying, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that she likes that guy better than me? I'm the greatest to these guys. I'm the one in charge. Why is she saying that? And then along comes Yavanna and says, hey, I want you to take this Radagast fellow with you because he's going to teach you a few things. And he really doesn't like that guy. And he's like, this guy's going to teach me what? This guy's an idiot, that's what he's thinking. And the only thing that Radagast managed to teach Saruman is how to talk to birds. And he used that for evil. That's why there's these Qurbine running around spying on people, And Radagast tried very hard to teach Saruman the lessons of humility and patience and pity and mercy, but he never got there, He was too arrogant. So basically, he had all these personality flaws pretty much from the beginning is what I'm getting at, Now, that's interesting. I don't think it's that Aula has bad taste in Maya. And I'll tell you what it really is that it... And this is wonderful that you're bringing this up, Walter, because this is all right here. I was going to say all this stuff anyway. I was going to stop and talk about all the things that you're mentioning, so it's really great that you're bringing this up. He mentioned that Saruman has a mind of metal and wheels. And what he's really saying is that Saruman cares more about things than people. And we see this in the Legendarium from the beginning to the end, is that when you start to care about devices and things and magical objects and wealth more than you care about your brothers and sisters in humanity, that's the path to evil. So it's not to say that if you care about those things at all that you're bad, but when you care about them too much, and we see it with Feanor being too attached to the Silmarils, We see it with Gollum and being too attached to the ring. We see it time and time again, is that when you start to think about devices more than you think about people, you've gone the wrong way. Aule, as a craftsman, he teaches people how to make things. That's not a bad thing, because a lot of the elves made some wonderful, beautiful things. Wonderful works of art and craft and subtlety and wonder. But when you're the greatest craftsman in the whole world, you're going to attract the sort of people who are only interested in that sort of thing. And that's where you get your Sauron and your Saruman and your Feanor, who's not a Maya, but Feanor was a student of Aule as well. So that's what we see there. And to their credit, none of the Valar look at Aule and say, "What's wrong with you, man? Why are so many of your guys going astray?" As a matter of fact, when one of Olmo's Maya went astray, we're talking about Osse. Osse loves destruction. He loves storms. He loves wrecking things. And along comes Melkor and says, "Hey, man, I'm going to set you loose. I'm going to let you do whatever you want." And he goes off with Melkor. And who brings him back to the side of good? Ewinin, who becomes his wife. Whose idea was that? It was Aule. Wasn't the Noldor told Smithcraft by Melkor? Oh, no. They hate him. No. No. They hate him. They were taught by Aule. None of them trusted Melkor. I mean, think about Feanor. Feanor was the greatest craftsman of all the elves, and nobody hated Melkor more than him. Melkor came to his house one day and said, "Hey, those Silmarils would be a lot safer with me than they are sitting there." And what did he say? "Begone, ye jail crow of Mandos." He had no patience for Melkor. Even as Melkor was poisoning his mind against his half-brother and setting in motion all these terrible things that would happen to him. The Noldor, they learned their crafts from Aule, and they made wonderful things. Some of them were used for good, some of them were used for evil, but they're all just tools, is what I'm saying. Like the Palantir, they're not good, they're not bad, they're just tools, But they also made wonderful things with Feanorian script and things like that. So what I'm saying is, it's not that Aule has bad taste in Maya. It's just that the nature of his work sometimes attracts a bad element. And that's where it basically comes down to. And also, and we'll talk about this a lot more when we read the Silmarillion, but the Valar are kind of naive. They don't really understand evil. They don't understand deception. They come to understand it over time, but they really don't get the whole idea of evil. They don't get that when Melkor says he's redeemed and he's good now, that he's not. You know what I mean? They're very naive. All right, let's continue, because it's starting to get a bit late, and we still have quite a bit. We got to get to page 90 here, and we're on page 76. Hey, no problem. I'm going to try and go a little faster here, even though I don't like to make Treebeard talk fast, but we're going to try and get a little faster here, because I don't want to go too late here, because eventually my voice will give out, and then I have to stream tomorrow afternoon. I have to play Final Fantasy on Twitch, so let's see. Where's Saruman? Okay. Treebeard rumbled for a moment as if he were pronouncing some deep subterranean Entish malediction. "Some time ago, I began to wonder how orcs dared pass through my woods so freely," he went on. "Only lately did I guess that Saruman was to blame, and that long ago he had been spying out all the ways and discovering my secrets. He and his foul folk are making havoc now. Down on the borders they are felling trees. Good trees. Some of the trees they just cut down and leave to rot. Orc mischief, that, but most are hewn up and carried off to feed the fires of Orthanc. There is always a smoke rising from Isengard these days. Curse him, root and branch. Many of those trees were my friends, creatures I had known from nut and acorn. Many had voices of their own that were lost forever now. And there are wastes of stump and bramble, where once there were singing groves. I have been idle. I have let things slip. It must stop." Treebeard raised himself from his bed with a jerk, stood up and thumped his hand on the table. The vessels of light trembled and set up 2 jets of flame. There was a flicker like green fire in his eyes, and his beard stood out stiff as a great besom. "I will stop it," he boomed, "and you shall come with me. You may be able to help me. You will be helping your own friends that way too, for if Saruman is not checked, Rohan and Gondor will have an enemy behind as well as in front. Our roads go together, to Isengard." "We will come with you," said Merry. "We will do what we can." "Yes," said Pippin. "I should like to see the White Hand overthrown. I should like to be there, even if I could not be of much use. I shall never forgive Ugluk and the crossing of Rohan." "Good, good," said Treebeard. "But I spoke hastily. We must not be hasty. I have become too hot. I must cool myself and think, for it is easier to shout stop than to do it." He strode to the archway and stood for some time under the falling rain of the spring. Then he laughed and shook himself, and wherever the drops of water fell glittering from him to the ground, they glinted like red and green sparks. He came back and laid himself on the bed again, and was silent. After some time, the hobbits heard him murmuring again. He seemed to be counting on his fingers. "Fangorn, Finglas, Fladrif, aye," he sighed. "The trouble is that there are so few of us left," he said, turning toward the hobbits. "Only 3 remain of the first Ents that walked in the woods before the darkness. Only myself, Fangorn, and Finglas, and Fladrif. To give them their elvish names, you may call them Leaflock and Skinbark, if you like that better. And of us 3, Leaflock and Skinbark are not much use for this business. Leaflock has grown sleepy, almost treeish, you might say. He is taken to standing by himself, half asleep all through the summer when the deep grass of the meadows round his knees. Covered with leafy hair he is. He used to rouse up in winter, but as of late he has been too drowsy to walk far even then. Skinbark lived on the mountain slopes west of Isengard. That is where the worst trouble has been. He was wounded by the orcs, and many of his folk and his tree herds have been murdered and destroyed. He has gone up into the high places, among the birches that he loves best, and he will not come down. Still, I dare say I could get together a fair company of our younger folks. If I could make them understand the need, if I could rouse them. We are not a hasty folk. What a pity there are so few of us." "Why are there so few when you have lived in this country so long?" asked Pippin. "Have a great many died?" "Oh, no," said Treebeard. "None have died from inside, as you might say. Some have fallen in the evil chances of the long years, of course, and more have grown treeish. But there were never many of us, and we have not increased. There have been no entings, no children, you would say, not for a terrible long count of years. You see, we lost the Entwives." I was thinking that, Matt, out of all the characters that were adapted to the film, Treebeard had probably the most of his own dialogue intact. Almost all the things that he says in the movie are lines from the book, but we forget how much he actually talked and how much lore he gives us. He talks a lot. "How very sad," said Pippin. "How was it that they all died?" "They did not die," said Treebeard. "I never said died. We lost them, I said. We lost them, and we cannot find them." He sighed. "I thought most folk knew that. There were songs about the hunt of the Ents for the Entwives, sung among men, elves and men from Mirkwood to Gondor. They cannot be quite forgotten." "Well, I am afraid songs have not come west over the mountains of the Shire," said Merry. "Won't you tell us some more, or sing us one of the songs?" "Yes, I will indeed," said Treebeard, seeming pleased with the request. "But I cannot tell it properly, only in short, and then we must end our talk. Tomorrow we have councils to call, and work to do, and maybe a journey to begin. It is a rather strange and sad story," he went on after a pause. "When the world was young, and the woods were wide and wild, the Ents and the Entwives, and there were Ent maidens then, the loveliness of Fimbrethil, the wand-limbed, the light-footed, in the days of our youth. They walked together and they housed together, but our hearts did not go on growing in the same way. The Ents gave their love to things that they met in the world, and the Entwives gave their thought to other things, for the Ents loved the great trees and the wild woods and the slope of the high hills, and they drank of the mountain streams, and ate only such fruit as the trees let fall in their path.
and they learned of the elves and spoke with the trees. But the Entwives gave their minds to the lesser trees, and to the meads in sunshine, beyond the feet of the forests. And they saw the sloe in the thicket, and the wild apple and the cherry blossoming in spring, and the green herbs in the waterlands in the summer, and the seeding grasses in the autumn fields. They did not desire to speak with these things, but they wished them to hear and to obey what was said to them. The Entwives ordered them to grow according to their wishes, and bear leaf and fruit to their liking, for the Entwives desired order, and plenty, and peace, by which they mean that things should remain where they had set them. So the Entwives made gardens to live in, but we Ents went on wandering, and we only came to the gardens now and again. Then when the darkness came in the north, the Entwives crossed the great river, and made new gardens and tilled new fields, and we saw them more seldom. After the darkness was overthrown, the land of the Entwives blossomed richly, and their fields were full of corn. Many men learned the crafts of the Entwives, and honored them greatly. But we were only a legend to them, a secret in the heart of the forest. Yet here we are, while all the gardens of the Entwives are wasted. Men call them the Brown Lands now.
So what we learned here is the possible fate of the Entwives. Now, Tolkien always said he didn't know what happened to them. He feared that they may have all died. And I think he's right in the sense that I think a great many of them did die in what we know as the War of the Last Alliance of Elves and Men, the war against Sauron in the Second Age. And the Brown Lands, this was a very wooded area, very garden area, and Sauron just burned it all to the ground. So it's possible that the Entwives and Entmaidens, or at least most of them, were caught up in that and probably died.
I remember it was long ago, in the time of the war between Sauron and the Men of the Sea, desire came over me to see Fimberthil again. Very fair she was still in my eyes, when I had last seen her, though little like the Entmaiden of old. For the Entwives were bent and brown by their labour, their hair parched by the sun to the hue of ripe corn, and their cheeks like red apples. Yet their eyes were still the eyes of our own people. We crossed over Anduin and came to their land, but we found a desert. It was all burned and uprooted, for war had passed over it, but the Entwives were not there. Long we called and long we searched, and we asked all folk that we met which way the Entwives had gone. Some said they had never seen them, and some said they had seen them walking away west, and some said east, and others south. But nowhere that we went will we find them. Our sorrow was very great. Yet the wild wood called, and we returned to it. For many years we used to go out every now and again and look for the Entwives, walking far and wide and calling them by their beautiful names. But as time passed we went more seldom and wandered less far. And now the Entwives were only a memory for us, and our beards were long and grey. The elves made many songs concerning the search of the Ents, and some of the songs passed into the tongues of men. But we made no songs about it, being content to chant their beautiful names when we thought of the Entwives. We believe that we may meet again in a time to come, and perhaps we shall find somewhere a land where we can live together and both be content. But it is foreboded that that will only be when we have both lost all that we now have. And it may be well that time is drawing near at last. For if Sauron of old destroyed the gardens, the enemy today seems likely to wither all the woods. There was an elvish song that spoke of this, or at least I understand it. It used to be sung up and down the great river. It was never an Entish song, mark you. It would have been a very long song in Entish, but we know it by heart and hum it now and again. This is how it runs in your tongue. When spring unfolds the beecham leaf and sap is in the bough, when light is on the wildwood stream and wind is on the brow, when stride is long and breath is deep and keen the mountain air, come back to me, and say my land is fair. When spring is come to garth and field and corn is on the blade, when blossom like a shining snow is on the orchard laid, when shower and sun upon the earth with fragrance fill the air, I'll linger here, and I will not come, because my land is fair. When summer lies upon the world, and in a noon of gold, beneath the root of sleeping leaves the dreams of trees unfold. When woodland halls are green and cool, and wind is in the west, come back to me, and say my land is best. When summer warms of hanging fruit and burns the berry brown, when straw is gold and ear is white, and harvest comes to town, when honey spills and apple swells, though wind be in the west, I'll linger here beneath the sun, because my land is best. When winter comes, the winter wild that hill and wood shall slay, when trees shall fall and starlight night devour the sunless day, when wind is in the deadly east, then in the bitter rain I'll look for thee and call to thee, I'll come to thee again. When winter comes and the singing ends, when darkness falls at last, when broken is the barren bough and light its labours past, I'll look for thee and wait for thee until we meet again. Together we will take the road beneath the bitter rain. Together we will take the road that leads into the west, and far away we'll find a land where both our hearts may rest. Treebeard ended his song. That is how it goes, he said. It is elvish, of course, light-hearted, quick-worded, and soon over. I dare say it is fair enough. But the Ents could say more on their side if they had time. But now I am going to stand up and take a little sleep. Where will you stand? We usually lie down to sleep, said Merry. We shall be all right where we are. Lie down to sleep, said Treebeard. Why, of course you do. I was forgetting. Singing that song put me in mind of old times. Almost thought that I was talking to young Entings, I did. Well, you can lie on the bed. I am going to stand in the rain. Good night. Merry and Pippin climbed into the bed and curled up into the soft grass and fern. It was fresh and sweet-scented and warm. The lights died down and the glow of trees faded, but outside, under the arch, they could see old Treebeard standing, motionless, with his arms raised above his head. The bright stars peered out of the sky and lit the falling water as it spilled onto his fingers and head, and dripped in hundreds of silver drops onto his feet. Listening to the tinkling of the drops, the hobbits fell asleep. Notice that last bit there is almost a poem or a song of its own. There's a meter to it, there's a rhyme to it. They woke to find a cool sun shining in the great court and on the floor of the bay. Shreds of high cloud were overhead, running in a stiff easterly wind. Treebeard was not to be seen, but while Merry and Pippin were bathing in the basin by the arch, they heard him humming and singing as he came up the path between the trees. Good morning, Merry and Pippin, he boomed when he saw them. You sleep long. I have been many 100 strides already today. Now we will have a drink and go to Entmoot. He poured them out 2 full bowls from a stone jar, but from a different jar. The taste was not the same as it had been the night before. It was earthier and richer, more sustaining and food-like, so to speak. While the hobbits drank, sitting on the edge of the bed and nibbling small pieces of elf cake, because they felt that eating was a necessary part of breakfast than because they felt hungry, Treebeard stood, humming in Entish or Elvish some strange tongue, and looking up at the sky. I could probably sing that to a tune, but it is meant to be 2 different voices, and then the 2 sung together at the end, which is why I didn't try to do that. But thank you for thinking that. I totally could do that. I feel that, like a lot of Tolkien songs could be put to music. Where is Entmoot? Pippin ventured to ask. Entmoot, said Treebeard, turning round. It is not a place. It is a gathering of events, which does not happen nowadays. But I have managed to make a fair number promise to come. We shall meet in the place where we have always met. Dern Dingle, men call it. It is away south from here. We must be there before noon. Before long they set off. Treebeard carried the hobbits in his arms, as on the previous day. At the entrance to the court he turned to the right, stepped over the stream, and strode away southward along the feet of the great tumbled slopes, where trees were scanty. Above these, the hobbit saw thickets of birch and rowan, and beyond them dark climbing pine woods. Soon Treebeard turned a little away from the hills and plunged into deep groves, where the trees were larger, taller, and thicker than any the hobbits had seen ever before. For a while they felt faintly the sense of stifling which they had noticed when they first ventured into Fangorn, but it soon passed.
Treebeard did not talk to them. He hummed to himself deeply and thoughtfully. But Merry and Pippin caught no proper words. It all sounded like boom, boom, rum, boom, boo-rar, boom, boom, dar-rar, boom, boom, dar-rar, boom, and so on, with a constant change of note and rhythm. Now and again they thought they heard an answer, a hum, or a quiver of sound. It seemed to come out of the earth, or from boughs above their heads, or perhaps from the boles of the trees, but Treebeard did not stop or turn his head to either side. They had been going for a long while. Pippin had tried to keep count of the Ents strides, but had failed, getting lost at about 3,000, when Treebeard began to slacken his pace. Suddenly he stopped, put the hobbits down, and raised his curled hands to his mouth so that they made a hollow tube. Then he blew or called through them. A great whoom-hum rang out like a deep-throated horn in the woods, and seemed to echo from the trees. Far off there came several directions a similar whoom-hum-hoom. That was not an echo, but an answer. Treebeard now perched Merry and Pippin on his shoulders and strode on again, every now and then sending out another horn call, and each time the answers came louder and nearer. In this way they came at last to what looked like an impenetrable wall of dark evergreen trees. Trees of a kind that the hobbits had never seen before. They branched out right from the roots, and were densely clad in dark glossy leaves like thornless holly, and they bore many stiff upright flower spikes with large shining olive-colored buds. Turning to the left and skirting this huge hedge, Treebeard came in a few strides to a narrow entrance. Through it a worn path passed and dived suddenly down a long, steep slope. The hobbits saw that they were descending into a great dingle, almost as round as a bowl, very wide and deep, crowned at the rim with the high, dark evergreen hedge. It was smooth and grass-clad inside, and there were no trees except the very tall and beautiful silver birches that stood at the bottom of the bowl. 2 other paths led down into the dingle, from the west and from the east. Several Ents had already arrived. More were coming in down the other paths, and some were now following Treebeard. As they drew near, the hobbits gazed at them. They had expected to see a number of creatures as much like Treebeard as one hobbit is like another, at any rate to a stranger's eye, and they were very much surprised to see nothing of the kind. The Ents were as different from one another as trees from trees, some as different as one tree is from another of the same name, but quite different growth in history, and some as different as one tree kind from another, as birch from beech, oak from fir. There were a few older Ents, bearded and gnarled like hail, but ancient trees, though none looked as ancient as Treebeard. And there were tall, strong Ents, clean-limbed and smooth-skinned like forest trees in their prime, but there were no young Ents, no saplings. Altogether there were about 24 standing in the wide grassy floor of the dingle, as many more were marching in. At first Merry and Pippin were struck chiefly by the variety that they saw, that many shapes and colours, the differences in girth and height and length of leg and arm, and the number of toes and fingers, anything from 3 to 9. A few seemed more or less related to Treebeard and reminded them of beech trees or oaks, but there were other kinds. Some recalled the chestnut, brown-skinned Ents with large splay-fingered hands and short, thick legs. Some recalled the ash, tall, straight grey Ents with many-fingered hands and long legs. Some the fir, the tallest Ents, and others the birch, the rowan, and the linden. But when the Ents all gathered round Treebeard, bowing their heads lightly, murmuring in their slow, musical voices, and looking long and intently at the strangers, then the hobbits saw that they were all of the same kindred, and all had the same eyes, not all so old or as deep as Treebeard's, but all with the same slow, steady, thoughtful expression, and the same green flicker. 1 second here. Yeah, I would like to do something like that if I had the opportunity to, or if that sort of thing was actually copyright safe. As it is now, I have to stop and educate on this. I can't just do a straight reading because then it's not copyright safe. So it's very interesting. We can see Tolkien's sort of commentary on the nature of people, that we might all look very different from each other, but we are all the same kind, and that's really important to Tolkien. He was a very egalitarian sort of man, which, I think seems to be a dwindling breed, unfortunately. Let's continue on here. As soon as the whole company was assembled, standing in a wide circle round Treebeard, a curious and unintelligible conversation began. The Ents began to murmur slowly. First one joined, then another, until they were all chanting together in a long rising and falling rhythm, now louder on one side of the ring, now dying away there, and rising to a great boom on the other side. Though he could not catch or understand any of the words, he supposed the language was Entish. Pippin found the sound very pleasant to listen to at first, but gradually his attention wavered. After a long time, and the chant showed no signs of slackening, he found himself wondering, since Entish was such an unhasty language, whether they had yet got further than good morning, and if Treebeard was to call the roll, how many days it would take to sing all their names. I wonder what the Entish is for yes and no, he thought. He yawned. Treebeard was immediately aware of him. Hey, my Pippin, he said, and the other Ents all stopped their chant. You are a hasty folk, I was forgetting. And anyway, it is wearisome listening to a speech you do not understand. You may get down now. I have told your names to the Entmoot, and they have seen you and have agreed that you are not orcs, and that a new line shall be put in the old lists. We have got no further yet, but that is quick work for an Entmoot. You and Merry can stroll about in the dingle if you like. There is a well of good water, if you need refreshing, away yonder in the north bank. There are still some words to speak before the moot really begins. I will come and see you again, and tell you how things are going. Yeah. Well, the way that it works in British copyright law is it has to be 75 years after the death of the author. So we got a while yet. That's the way that it works there. Copyright law is just so pernicious as it is, so, there you have it. All right, let's continue on here. He put the hobbits down. Before they walked away, they bowed low. This feat seemed to amuse the Ents very much, to judge by the tone of their murmurs and the flicker of their eyes, but they soon turned back to their own business. Merry and Pippin climbed up the path that came from the west and looked about the opening in the great hedge. Long tree-clad slopes rose from the lip of the dingle and away beyond them, above the fir trees of the furthest ridge of the rose, sharp and white. By the way, he died in 73, didn't he? I just realized you said 72. Now I have to fact check this here. Hold on. I want to say it was 19. Yeah, it was September 2nd, 1973. So you go 75 years beyond that, and that would be his works would come into the public domain. It becomes a little bit more questionable when we talk about the Silmarillion, though, because there could be made the argument that Christopher Tolkien contributed enough material to be considered one of the authors of the work, in which case it would be 75 years after the death of Christopher Tolkien, which I think he died in 2019, I want to say. So, yeah. Oh no, yeah. And doesn't the guy who made that, he made like I think there's a Popeye one on down the pipeline too, and I don't understand people wanting to see stuff like that. I don't mind horror films, but a Winnie the Pooh horror film, that's just, I almost see A.A. Milne just spinning in the grave at that point. All right, let's go. We're only 6 pages away here. I've gone late, but that's okay, since we have like almost 60 people watching, and I'm very happy about that, by the way. By the way, if you're watching this and you haven't subscribed to me on YouTube, please subscribe. If you're not following me on Twitch, please follow. And if you're watching me on YouTube, consider, if you want to support me and you want to help me out and help me continue doing this, consider hitting that join button and joining as a member. It's only $5 a month. Yeah, see, that's the thing. Disney has... Well, see, Disney can only affect the American copyright law. We're talking... British copyright law is different. The Mouse, of course, the Disney Corporation has changed the American... or at least has lobbied for the change of American copyright law. And then, of course, there's international copyright law. It's very complex. But I was speaking only of the way that it works in England. Okay, let's see. Where were we? Oh, I was far beyond that. Tolkien never talked about Popeye, not that we know of. Maybe he had a conversation with his children about it. I don't know. Popeye came around the same time that The Hobbit did. I do wonder what he would think of something like Popeye, you know? It's kind of funny. All right, let's see where we were. Where was I? I seem to have lost my spot. Oh, here it is. Okay. I wonder where Isengard is, said Pippin. I don't know quite where we are, said Mary, but that peak is probably Methydras, as far as I can remember. The ring of Isengard lies in a fork or deep cleft at the end of the mountains. It is probably down behind this great ridge. There seems to be smoke, a haze over there left at the peak, don't you think? What is Isengard like, said Pippin. I wonder what Ents can do about it anyway. So do I, said Mary. Isengard is a sort of ring of rocks or hills, I think, with a flat space inside and an island or pillar of rock in the middle called Orthanc. Saruman has a tower on it. There is a gate, perhaps more than one, in the encircling wall, and I believe there is a stream running through it. It comes out of the mountains and flows on across the gap of Rohan. It does not seem the sort of place for Ents to tackle, but I have an odd feeling about these Ents. Somehow I don't think they are quite as safe as, well, funny as they seem. They seem slow, queer, and patient, almost sad, and yet I believe they could be roused. If that happens, I would rather not be on the other side. Yes, said Pippin. I know what you mean. There might be all the difference between being an old cow sitting and thoughtfully chewing, and a bull charging, and the change might come suddenly. I wonder if Treebeard will rouse them. I'm sure he means to try, but they don't like being roused. Treebeard got roused himself last night and then bottled it up again. The hobbits turned back. The voices of the Ents were still rising and falling in their conclave. The sun had now risen high enough to look over the high hedge. It gleamed on the tops of the birches and lit the northward side of the dingle with a cool yellow light. There they saw a little glittering fountain. They walked along the rim of the great bowl at the feet of the evergreens. It was pleasant to feel cool grass about their toes again and not to be in a hurry, and they climbed down to the gushing water. They drank a little, a clean, cold, sharp draught, and they sat down on a mossy stone, watching the patches of sun on the grass and the shadows of the sailing clouds passing over the floor of the dingle. The murmur of the Ents went on. It seemed a very strange and remote place outside their world, and yet far from everything that had ever happened to them. A great longing came over them for the faces and voices of their companions, especially for Frodo and Sam and for Strider.
I am ambidextrous.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think copyright is very pernicious. I would like to see these works come into the public domain, and but I would hope that they would be treated better than, like, say, Winnie the Pooh. Which is just, I would like them to be treated, more like The Matter of Britain. Oh, see, I can't ever find the specific books I'm looking for, which is why here it is. Which is why I really need that that shelf thing I'm gonna get. See, like, right here we have Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. This is Tolkien's version of it. There's a lot of different versions of it. And I like the idea that The Matter of Britain, also known as the Arthurian legend, doesn't have canon. There's no such thing as canon. It has classics. So if anybody could publish their Middle-earth stories at any time, and then we can say which ones are good and which ones are not good, and say, well, none of them are canon and all of them are canon. We don't have canon. We just have classics, and we choose which ones are classics. I would love to see that. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. At last there came a pause in the Ent voices, and looking up they saw Treebeard coming toward them with another Ent at his side.
Here I am again, said Treebeard. Are you getting weary or feeling impatient? Well, I am afraid that you must not get impatient yet. We have finished the first stage now, but I have still got to explain things again to those that live a long way off, far from Isengard, and those that I could not get round to before the moot, and after that we shall have to decide what to do. However, deciding what to do does not take Ents so long as going over all the facts and events that they have made up their minds about. Still, it is no use denying. We shall be here for a long time yet, a couple of days very likely, so I have brought you a companion. He has an Ent house nearby. Braggalad is his elvish name. He says he has already made up his mind and does not need to remain at the moot. He is the nearest thing among us to a hasty Ent. You ought to get on together. Goodbye.
Treebeard turned and left them. And by the way, for those watching on YouTube, see those little symbols that Chewie wrote there. The Eye of Sauron, the One Ring. There's also a Silmaril in there as well. These are all drawings that I made, and these are emotes that you can get if you're a member. So, like I said, consider membership. It really does help me out. Braggalad stood for some time, surveying the hobbits solemnly, and they looked at him, wondering when he should show any signs of hastiness. He was tall and seemed to be one of the younger Ents. He had smooth, shining skin on his arms and legs. His lips were ruddy and his hair was grey-green. He could bend and sway like a slender tree in the wind. At last he spoke, and his voice, though resonant, was higher and clearer than Treebeard's. "Ah, my friends, let's go for a walk," he said. "I am Breggalad, that is Quickbeam in your language, but it is only a nickname, of course. They have called me that ever since I said yes to an elder Ent before he had finished his question. Also, I drink quickly and go out while some are still wetting their beards. Come with me." He reached down 2 shapely arms and gave a long-fingered hand to each of the hobbits. All that day they walked about in the woods with him, singing and laughing, for Quickbeam often laughed. He laughed if the sun came out from behind a cloud. He laughed if they came upon a stream or a spring. Then he stopped and splashed his feet and head with water, and laughed sometimes at the sound or whisper in the trees. Whenever he saw a rowan tree, he halted a while, with his arms stretched out, and sang, and swayed as he sang. At night time, he brought them to his Ent house, nothing more than a mossy stone set upon turves under a green bank. Rowan trees grew in a circle about it, and there was water, as in all Ent houses, a spring bubbling out from the bank. They talked for a while as darkness fell on the forest. Not far away the voices of the Entmoot could be heard still going on, but now they seemed deeper and less leisurely, and every now and again one great voice would rise in a high and quickening music, while all the others died away. But beside them Breggalad spoke gently in their own tongue, almost whispering, and they learned that he belonged to Skinbark's people, and the country where they had lived had been ravaged. That seemed to the hobbits quite enough to explain his hastiness, at least in the matter of orcs. "There were rowan trees in my home," said Breggalad, softly and sadly. "Rowan trees that took root when I was an Enting. Many years ago, in the quiet of the world, the oldest were planted by the Ents to try and please the Entwives, but they looked at them and smiled and said that they knew where whiter blossoms and richer fruit were growing. Yet there are no trees of all that race, the people of the rose, that are so beautiful to me. And these trees grew and grew until the shadow of each was like a green hall, and their red berries in the autumn were a burden and a beauty and a wonder. Birds used to flock there. I like birds, even when they chatter, and the rowan has enough to spare. But the birds became unfriendly and greedy, and tore at the trees, and threw fruit down, and did not eat it. Then orcs came with axes and cut down my trees. I came and called them by their long names, but they did not quiver. They did not hear or answer. They lay dead. O Oren Farne, Lassa Mista Caranaria, O Rowan fair upon your hair, how white the blossom lay. O Rowan mine, I saw you shine upon a summer's day. Your rind so bright, your leaves so light, your voice so cool and soft. Upon your head how golden red the crown you bore aloft. O Rowan dead, upon your hair is dry and grey, your crown is spilled, your voice is stilled, forever and a day. O Oren Farne, Lassa Mista Caranimerie. The hobbits fell asleep to the sound of the soft singing of Breggalad, that seemed to lament in many tongues the fall of trees that he had loved. The next day they spent also in his company, but they did not go far from his house. Most of the time they sat silent under the shelter of the bank, for the wind was colder, and the clouds closer and greyer, and there was little sunshine, and in the distance the voices of the Ents at the moot still rose and fell, sometimes loud and strong, sometimes low and sad, sometimes quickening, sometimes slow and solemn as a dirge. A second night came, and still the Ents held conclave under hurrying clouds of fitful stars. The third day broke, bleak and windy. At sunrise the Ents' voices rose to a great clamour and then died down again. As the morning wore on, the wind fell and the air grew heavy with expectancy. The hobbits could see that Breggalad was now listening intently, although to them, down in the dell of his Ent house, the sound of the moot was faint. The afternoon came, and the sun, going west toward the mountains, sent out long yellow beams between the cracks and fissures of the clouds. Suddenly they were aware that everything was very quiet. The whole forest stood in listening silence. Of course the Ent voices had stopped. What did that mean? Breggalad was standing up erect and tense, looking back northward towards Durndiggle. Then with a crash came a great ringing shout, "Aruma!" The trees quivered and bent as if a gust had struck them. There was another pause, and then a marching music began like solemn drums, and above the rolling beats and booms their welled voices sang high and strong, we come with roll of drum, ta-runda, runda, runda, ram." The Ents were coming, ever nearer and louder rose their song. We come with horn and drum, ta-runa, runa, runa, rum. Breggalad picked up the hobbits and strode from his house. Before long they saw the marching line approaching. The Ents were swinging along with great strides down the slope toward them. Treebeard was at their head, and some 50 followers behind him, 2 abreast, keeping step with their feet and beating time with their hands upon their flanks. As they drew near, the flash and flicker of their eyes could be seen. "Whom, ha! Here we come with a boom, here we come at last," called Treebeard when he caught sight of Bregalad and the hobbits. "Come join the moot, we are off to Isengard." "To Isengard!" the Ents cried in many voices. "To Isengard! To Isengard! Though Isengard be ringed and barred with doors of stone, though Isengard be strong and hard, as cold as stone and bare as bone, we go, we go, we go to war, to hew the stone and break the door. For bowl and bough are burning now, the furnace roars, we go to war. To land of gloom, with tramp of doom, with roll of drum, we come, to Isengard, with doom we come, with doom we come, with doom we come." So they sang as they marched southward. Looks like one of the most evil Octorok you've ever seen. Wait, what does? Oh, you're talking about... Yeah, because it kind of looks like a face. I know what an Octorok is. I have played The Legend of Zelda. So here we see... Sort of like, I want to just highlight... There's not much to talk about lore-wise, right? This is all pretty cut and dry. But I want to just highlight the difference here between movie and book. Because in the movie, they were telling a very different sort of story. The same story, but a very different sort of story. Where the Ents were sort of just like, whatever, ain't our problem. You know. And Merry and Pippin have to be the ones to rouse the elves. And that does, the elves, the Ents. And then that doesn't work. They all just say, whatever. Not our problem. And so Treebeard says he's going to bring them to the Shire, and, you know, they sort of trick him to going the wrong way, and then he sees the desolation of Saruman. And then he sends out the Aruma, and then they all go marching off to war. And here we see that when Merry and Pippin come into the story, Treebeard's already pretty close to being roused. He's already sort of like, I got to do something about that Saruman guy. I just got to convince the other Ents. And that Merry and Pippin are not instrumental in making this happen. They just get to witness it, which is really important for, you know, the fact that we even know about it. Yeah, and that's the thing. And what's cool about it, though, is that Treebeard is very sensitive to the idea that, yeah, this is taking too long from their perspective. So he sets them off with Quickbeam here, and they have a blast with him. They're just wandering through the forest, drinking, eating, chilling out, you know, doing very, very Hobbit things. They love it. Your gray cover copy is almost falling apart as you're following. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I mean, my copies are these are older than I am, right? And this one's in pretty good shape. There's a bit of a tear there, but my Fellowship of the Ring has seen better days, and I'm thinking I'm just going to get a newer set of the Lord of the Rings that I could use for videos and for research, and sort of just put these away where they could be, you know, preserved. Of course, that all costs money, so, you know, there's that too. All right, let's finish this because we only have 2 pages here. Bregalad, his eyes shining, swung into the line beside Treebeard. The old Ent now took the hobbits back and set them on his shoulders again, and so they rode proudly at the head of the singing company with beating hearts and hands held high. Though they had expected something to happen eventually, they were amazed at the change that had come over the Ents. It seemed now as sudden as the bursting of a flood that had long been held back by a dike. "The Ents made up their minds rather quickly after all, didn't they?" Pippin ventured to say after some time. When for the moment the singing paused, the only beating of hands and feet was heard. Hold on, I heard the sound of a text, and I just want to see if that's anything I need to... Hold on. Okay, sorry, I just needed to answer that text. Oh, it's an edition that's known to fall apart. I'm sorry to hear that. I mean, like I said, these are my childhood copies. You know, I've had these for a long time. These are older than I am. This is 1978 here on the back. I was born in 1980, so these are the ones I had when I was a young lad. All right, let's see. Where was I?
"Quickly," said Treebeard. Yes, indeed, quicker than I expected. Indeed, I have not seen them roused like this for many an age. We Ents do not like being roused, and we never are roused unless it is clear to us that our trees and our lives are in great danger. That has not happened in this forest since the wars of Sauron and the Men of the Sea. It is the orc work, the wanton hewing room, without even the bad excuse of feeding the fires, that has so angered us, and the treachery of a neighbor who should have helped us. Wizards ought to know better. They do know better. There is no curse in Elvish, Entish, or the tongues of men bad enough for such treachery. Down with Saruman.
Will you really break the doors of Isengard? Asked Merry.
Well, we could, you know. You do not know, perhaps, how strong we are. Maybe you've heard of trolls. They are mighty strong, but trolls are only counterfeits, made by the enemy in the great darkness, in mockery of Ents, as orcs were of elves. We are stronger than trolls. We are made of the bones of the earth. We can split stone like the roots of trees, only quicker, far quicker if our minds are roused. If we are not hewn down or destroyed by fire or blast of sorcery, we could split Isengard into splinters and crack its walls into rubble.
So let's just briefly mention the trolls, right? He mentions the trolls made by the enemy, capital E enemy, Morgoth, not Sauron. Capital E enemy is Morgoth, the great darkness before the sun, the deeps of time. And they are counterfeits made by the enemy in the great darkness in mockery of the Ents as orcs for mockery of elves. So we... thank you, Matt. Thank you. So what we see here is the thought that the trolls were specifically meant as a mockery of the Ents, just like we could say that the dragons may be a mockery of eagles, although they didn't originally fly. The orcs, of course, are mockery of elves. You know, we see this sort of thing. It's really, really interesting. And, of course, you know, the fact that when exposed to sunlight that the trolls turn to stone, except for, of course, the Ologhai, which are more manifestations of Sauron's will, we see that they are probably just made from stone. That's probably what they are. They're probably animated stone. And this gives us to, you know, the thought of the other Ents, the stone Ents. Although the stone Ents are called so because they live near the mountains, but that's where the trolls live too. So it's sort of interesting how it all sort of ties together. And thank you for that, Matt. All right, we're only a little bit left here. I had to pause there, though.
But Saruman will try to stop you, won't he? Yes, that is so. I have not forgotten it. Indeed, I have long thought about it. But you see, many of the Ents are younger than I am, by many lives of trees. They are all roused now, and their mind is all on one thing, breaking Isengard. But they will start thinking again before long. They will cool down a little when we take our evening drink. What a thirst we shall have. But let them march now and sing. We have a long way to go, and there is time ahead for thought. It is something to have started.
Treebeard marched on, singing with the others for a while, but after a time his voice died to a murmur and fell silent again. Pippin could see that his old brow was wrinkled and knotted. At last he looked up, and Pippin could see a sad look in his eyes. Sad, but not unhappy. There was a light in them, as if green flame had sunk deeper into the dark wells of his thoughts.
"Of course, it is likely enough, my friends," he said slowly. "Likely enough that we are going to our doom. The last march of the Ents. But if we stayed at home and did nothing, doom would find us anyway, sooner or later. That thought has been growing in our hearts, and that is why we are marching now. It is not a hasty resolve. Now at least the last march of the Ents may be worth a song. Aye," he sighed, we may help the other peoples before we pass away. Still, I should have liked to see the songs that come true about the Entwives. I should dearly like to have seen Fimbrethel again. But there, my friends, songs like trees bear fruit only in their own time and in their own way, and sometimes they are withered untimely.
The Ents went striding on at a great pace. They had descended into a long fold of the land that fell away southward, and they began to climb up and up on the high western ridge. The woods fell away, and they came to scattered groups of birch, and then to bare slopes where only a few gaunt pine trees grew. The sun sank behind the dark hill back in front. Grey dusk fell. Pippin looked behind. The number of the Ents had grown. Or what was happening? Where the dim bare slopes there had been crossed should lie, he thought he saw groves of trees, but they were moving. Could it be that the trees of Fangorn were awake, and the forest was rising, marching over the hills to war? He rubbed his eyes, wondering if sleep and shadow had deceived him, but the great grey shapes moved steadily onward. There was a noise like wind in many branches. The Ents were drawing near the crest of the ridge now, and all song had ceased. Night fell, and there was a silence. Nothing was to be heard save a faint quiver of the earth beneath the feet of the Ents, and a rustle, the shade of a whisper of many drifting leaves. At last they stood upon the summit, and looked down into a dark pit, the great cleft at the end of the mountains, Nan Curanir, the valley of Saruman.
"Night lies over Isengard," said Treebeard.
And that now is where we stop. By the way, I just realized, Matt, you mentioned a few. Wait, let's see. You mentioned Octorok earlier, and you're a big Nintendo fan, aren't you? Because your icon is a Metroid. I just noticed that. Okay, so Disney never did The Hobbit. Oh, Mogul. J.R.R. Tolkien detested Disney. He hated Disney. He said that Disney will never get a hold of any of his works. He really disliked it. Him and C.S. Lewis used to go to Disney films to just sort of boo and jeer at them, and make fun of them. So that's chapter 4. We've gotten through 2 chapters. So after this, we're actually going to go back to Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas. You've never read the book, but it sounds really good. Yeah, one of the best books ever, of course, The Lord of the Rings. We're going to go back to them. Chapter 5 is the White Rider. Like I said, the way that the Two Towers is told is sort of everything is happening at once, and we have to just keep going, back and forth here. We have the White Rider, and then the King of the Golden Hall, which is also following the same characters, of course, with Gandalf, because Gandalf's going to be returning here, and then of course we have Helm's Deep and the road to Isengard. So all the characters are going to sort of come together, and welcome in fan of coffee. I am also a fan of coffee as well. I have one of my coffee mugs right here. Hold on. Actually, Matt, you might appreciate this since it's a reference to an old video game. I got my little slime mug here. Although it's all keyed out because it's green, so it looks all transparent, but yeah. I don't know, actually. You'd have to look into it. But a lot of people who had their work, adapted by Disney weren't happy with the results. Yeah, it's because it's green, and I have a green screen. So that is going to be all we're going to talk about today. The Ents, like I said, I wasn't pausing a lot there, except when they mention something big, some of the deep lore, like when they talk about the enemy, they talk about Morgoth, they talk about Beleriand. But a lot of it is pretty straightforward stuff. We're going to have a lot to talk about with Gandalf because, of course, Dragon Quest is actually my favorite video game of all time. Love Dragon Quest. There's a lot to talk about with Gandalf's return, and a lot of the things that Gandalf says, that's going to be a slow chapter, And then we're gonna go over and we're going to meet Theoden, and a lot of things are going to happen. So we're going to go over the streaming schedule both for YouTube and for Twitch. If you're watching on Twitch, and if you're not watching on Twitch, if you're watching on YouTube, I do stream every single day on Twitch. It's all gaming streams. So tomorrow afternoon, I will be playing Final Fantasy for the After Years. And hold on, I shouldn't be on this screen, should I? I should be over here. Okay, because we're just about to end here. We'll be playing Final Fantasy for the After Years tomorrow afternoon. And then Saturday night, we have Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and Sunday night, Castlevania Revamped. So that's going to be the streaming schedule for the next few days. For Monday, Street Fighter 5. You guys know the basic schedule. For YouTube, though, next Thursday, the 17th, we'll be here at the same time at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, and we're going to be finishing that Hobbit video game, and also starting the Fellowship of the Ring video game, which I've never actually played. It's made by a lot of the same people that made the Hobbit, so it should be really interesting. And of course, we're going to be casting a rather analytical mind at both of them. And then on the 24th, I have not announced what we're going to do, but we will be streaming on the 24th. We might be just returning to the Two Towers, or I might have something else in mind. Keep an eye on the community tab and community posts. And keep in mind that you guys can supposedly, I don't know how it works, but you guys can somehow post to my community page now. I enabled something. I'm going to have to do a little bit of exploration and figure out exactly how that works and how people can contribute things to the community page and submit questions for our Q&A videos then. If you're on Twitch, we are going to be raiding out. If you're on YouTube, it's just going to end. So we will see you next time as we cast ourselves off to Mithlond, the Grey Havens, out to the Undying Lands. And, we'll see you guys next Thursday. There was one more. Like I said, I just want to say, once again, if you're watching on if you want to support me, if you're watching on YouTube, consider joining as a member. Thank you for the follow. If you're watching on Twitch, consider a subscription. I do stream every day, and most Thursdays are Tolkien streams. Anyway, guys, let's see who we have for the Twitch viewers that we can raid out to. Let's see who we can find. And thank you, everybody that came to the Twitch stream. Thank you, everybody that came to the YouTube stream. I never imagined that I'd be able to do both at the same time. They had to sort of change the contracts for that. I am going to raid... See, I always wish I could raid Corey Olsen, but he's not usually on Thursday nights, at least not this late. I think it's going to be... I think it's going to be... we'll raid Zophar, actually. He's playing Final Fantasy VII, which apparently he's never played before, which is kind of a wild thought, because he's the same age as me. And I remember back in the PlayStation days, he was very much into PlayStation, and he was a big fan of Lunar, the Silver Star story complete, and stuff like that. But anyway, here we go. We'll see you guys. Did the raid go through? I didn't think it went through. There it goes. Okay. We'll see you guys over on Zophar stream. For those of you on YouTube, I'll see you guys next week. Or if you're on the Discord, we'll see you then. And here we go. Yes. There's a raid call for those of you on Twitch. Bye, Gavon and everybody. See you next time.